In the harsh Wyoming territory of 1872, survival demanded cruelty, and the town of Millridge had perfected it. When a desperate rancher burst into the market square carrying his dying infant, the crowd didn't see tragedy. They saw contamination. The baby's cries grew weaker with each passing second, but every door slammed shut, every face turned away. Only one woman dared to step forward, the very woman the town had spent 2 years destroying. What happened next would shatter everything Millridge believed about worth, redemption, and the fierce power of a mother's choice. Follow this story to the end, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this journey travels. The September sun beat down on Millridge's market square with the kind of heat that made tempers short and patience shorter. Clara Whitmore stood behind her bread table in the same spot she'd occupied every Tuesday and Friday for the past 2 years, the corner furthest from the town well, where the dust was thickest and the foot traffic thinnest. Her position wasn't accidental. It was assigned, unspoken, but absolute, the way everything in her life had become since the day she'd buried her newborn son and watched her husband walk into the mountains, never to return. At 32, Clara carried weight the frontier didn't forgive. Soft curves in a world that demanded hardness, flesh where bone should show. Her brown hair, streaked with premature gray, hung in a thick braid down her back. Her dress, faded calico mended so many times the original pattern had become a ghost, strained across her chest and hips. She'd learned to make herself small despite her size, to occupy space without claiming it, to exist without demanding existence. 2 loaves, Mrs. Hutchinson said without looking at Clara's face, dropping coins on the weathered wood. The banker's wife didn't wait for change, didn't acknowledge Clara's quiet, "Thank you, ma'am." She simply gathered her bread and moved away, as if proximity itself carried risk. Clara swept the coins into her apron pocket and resumed her stillness. Around her, the market thrummed with life she wasn't permitted to join. Martha Sullivan laughed with the fabric merchant, her hands gesturing as she described her daughter's upcoming wedding. Thomas Green haggled good-naturedly with the blacksmith over horseshoes, their voices carrying the easy confidence of men whose reputations remained intact. Children darted between stalls, their shrieks of play piercing the afternoon haze. Clara existed in the spaces between these moments, in the silence that followed laughter when someone noticed her listening, in the careful paths people carved to avoid standing too close. Invisibility had become her armor, silence her only protection. She'd learned the rules of her exile through painful repetition. Don't speak first. Don't meet eyes. Don't smile. It implies presumption of welcome. Keep your hands busy, your head down, your presence forgettable. Above all, don't remind them of what you lost, what you failed to keep, what your body promised and couldn't deliver. The boarding house where she rented a single room took most of what she earned. Mrs. Griswold, the landlady, charged Clara twice what she charged other tenants, a penalty for being the kind of woman who might drive away respectable boarders. The remaining coins bought flour, yeast, salt, and the small luxuries that made survival bearable, a bit of honey when the bees had been generous, an apple when the harvest came in, a scrap of ribbon she'd hidden in her drawer and never worn. Clara had been married once, briefly, to a man who'd seen her softness as promise rather than failing. Robert Whitmore had courted her with quiet determination, unbothered by the whispers that questioned why any man would choose a woman of her size. They'd built a small life together, a cabin on borrowed land, hope for children, plans that felt solid enough to withstand frontier harshness. Then came the pregnancy, difficult from the start. Clara's body, which the town had already deemed excessive, swelled to proportions that drew stares even from women who should have understood. The midwife clicked her tongue at every visit, muttering about complications, about women who weren't built for bearing. The baby came too early, too small, his cries too weak to last beyond sunrise. Robert held their son as he died, then carried the tiny body to the cemetery himself. He didn't speak for 3 days. On the 4th day, he told Clara he needed to check the trapline in the high country. He kissed her forehead, a gesture so tender it broke something inside her, and walked into the mountains with his rifle and bedroll. They found his body 2 weeks later at the bottom of a ravine. The sheriff ruled it an accident, but Clara knew the truth. Her husband had been too kind to speak aloud. He couldn't bear to look at her anymore, couldn't bear the weight of their shared failure, couldn't bear to keep pretending their life together still held any promise. The town's sympathy lasted exactly as long as the funeral. After that came the whispers, the sideways glances, the slow, methodical exclusion that taught Clara her place. Women who'd once invited her to quilting circles suddenly had no room at their tables. Men who'd tipped their hats now looked past her as if she were fog. Children learned from their parents' averted eyes that Clara Whitmore was someone to ignore, someone whose very presence carried the taint of tragedy. But Clara survived. She learned to bake bread with flour she couldn't afford to waste, to coax yeast to life in a boarding house room with no proper kitchen, to produce loaves crusty and rich enough that even those who despised her would buy them. Bread didn't require conversation. Bread didn't judge. Bread was transaction without relationship, and transaction was all Clara had left. She was arranging her remaining loaves when the commotion started. At first it was just a ripple, voices rising at the far end of the square, people turning to look. Then the ripple became a wave, bodies pressing back, creating space around something Clara couldn't yet see. The market's cheerful chaos died into uneasy murmuring. A man stumbled into the square, and even from a distance Clara could see his desperation. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a rancher's rough clothing, canvas pants stained with dirt, and worse, a shirt that might have been blue once but had faded to the color of old bruises. Dark hair fell across his forehead, matted with sweat. His face, weathered by sun and wind, carried the kind of exhaustion that went beyond lack of sleep into something closer to spiritual depletion. In his arms, wrapped in a blanket that had once been white, was an infant. The baby's cries cut through the afternoon like broken glass, thin, desperate sounds that spoke of suffering Clara recognized from the single night she'd held her own son. These weren't the lusty wails of a healthy child demanding attention. These were the sounds of a life slipping away. Please. The man's voice cracked as he turned in the center of the square, his eyes searching the crowd that had instinctively recoiled. Please, someone. She needs milk. She needs a wet nurse. She's dying. Silence answered him. Not the peaceful silence of a moment's pause, but the deliberate silence of people choosing not to respond. Clara watched as the man, she didn't know his name, had never seen him before, turned to face the group of women clustered near the fabric merchant's stall. Martha Sullivan stood among them, her expression frozen somewhere between pity and disgust. Mrs. Sullivan? His voice held naked pleading. Please. I know you're nursing your youngest. I can pay. Martha's husband stepped forward, placing himself between the rancher and his wife. Move along, Cole. You're not welcome here. Cole. The name triggered recognition, even in Clara. Evan Cole, the rancher from the High Valley, the man whose wife had died birthing this very child 3 weeks ago. The man the town whispered about in tones usually reserved for discussing criminals or madmen. I'm not asking for charity, Evan continued, his voice rising with desperation that made several people step back. I have money. He shifted the baby, fumbling in his pocket with one hand while trying to support her weight with the other. Coins spilled onto the dirt. I can pay whatever you want. It's not about money. This came from Thomas Green, the blacksmith, his voice carrying the weight of community judgment. You know what people say about you, Cole, about what happened to your wife, about what you did. I didn't do anything. The anguish in Evan's voice silenced the square. Sarah died bringing our daughter into this world. That's all. That's the only truth. Then why won't you let anyone on your land? Someone called from the back of the crowd. Why do you keep everyone away? What are you hiding up there? Evan's jaw clenched. Clara could see him fighting for control, struggling to keep his voice level when everything in his posture screamed rage and grief. I'm not hiding anything. I'm trying to keep my daughter alive. She won't take cow's milk. She needs a mother's milk, and I can't. His voice broke completely. The baby's cries intensified, a sound so thin and desperate it seemed impossible anything that fragile could survive. Please, Evan whispered, turning in another slow circle, meeting eyes that immediately looked away. Someone. Anyone. She's just a baby. She hasn't done anything wrong. Please. Clara's hands gripped the edge of her table. Her breathing had gone shallow. Every instinct screamed at her to stay still, to remain in her assigned corner, to not draw attention. Getting involved would only bring more judgment, more exclusion, more confirmation of everything the town already believed about her capacity for failure. But that sound, that terrible weakening cry, she knew that sound, had heard it once before, had held a dying child in her own arms while his cries grew softer, softer, until they stopped altogether and the world became silence. What about the widow Whitmore? The voice came from somewhere in the crowd. Clara couldn't see who'd spoken, but she felt every eye in the square turn toward her corner, felt the weight of collective attention like a physical force. Laughter rippled through the gathering. Not full laughter, but the cruel chuckle of people sharing a joke at someone's expense. The Whitmore woman, Mrs. Hutchinson's voice dripped with disdain. She couldn't even keep her own baby alive. Even if she could help, Martha Sullivan added, her voice carrying false sweetness that made the cruelty worse. She's got nothing to offer. It's been 2 years. Whatever milk she had is long gone. More laughter. Clara felt her face burn, felt the familiar shame wash over her like dirty water. She should stay quiet, should accept the dismissal, should let this moment pass without making everything worse. But Evan Cole had stopped turning. He was looking directly at her, his eyes locking onto hers across the crowded square. In his gaze, Clara saw something that transcended desperation. She saw recognition, not of who she was, but of what she was. Another person the world had discarded, another soul carrying unbearable loss. The baby's cry weakened again, becoming little more than a whimper. Claire's feet moved before her mind could stop them. The crowd parted as she stepped away from her table, their laughter dying into shocked silence. She'd broken the unspoken rule. She'd claimed space, demanded to be seen, inserted herself into a moment where her presence wasn't wanted or warranted. She walked toward Evan Cole with her head up, her shoulders back, her body taking up exactly as much room as it needed without apology. Each step felt like defiance, like revolution, like choosing herself after 2 years of accepting she had no right to choose anything. When she reached him, she stopped, close enough to see the red veins in his eyes, the stubble darkening his jaw, the tremble in his arms from holding his daughter for what must have been hours. "Let me see her," Clara said quietly. Evan's breath caught. "You can help? You have... I don't know." Clara's honesty felt like the only gift she could offer. "I don't know if I can help. I don't know if I have anything left to give. But I'm willing to try. That's all I'm asking." His voice broke on the last word. "Just try. Please, just try." He shifted the blanket, revealing the infant's face for the first time. She was impossibly tiny, her skin carrying a grayish tint that spoke of starvation and struggle. Dark hair, wispy and sparse, framed a face that would have been beautiful if it weren't contorted with suffering. Her eyes, when they flickered open for a moment, were the deep blue of new life not yet decided on its final color. Her lips moved weakly, searching for sustenance that hadn't come. Clara's body responded before her mind caught up. Deep in her chest, she felt a sensation she hadn't experienced in 2 years, a tingling warmth, a sense of fullness, of purpose. Her breasts, which had dried up in the weeks after her son's death, suddenly felt heavy, tender, alive. "Where can we go?" Clara asked, her voice steady despite the chaos of sensation flooding through her. "Somewhere quiet, somewhere private. I have a room at the boarding house," Evan said quickly. "I was going to head back to the ranch today, but I can—" "No." Clara shook her head. "Mrs. Griswold would never allow me in a male boarder's room. We'll go to mine. It's not much, but it's private." "She'll charge you," Mrs. Hutchinson called out, her voice sharp. "You know Griswold will charge you extra for bringing a man to your room." Clara turned, meeting the banker's wife's eyes directly for the first time in 2 years. "Then she'll charge me. Some things are worth the cost." The walk to the boarding house took less than 5 minutes, but felt like crossing continents. Behind them, the market erupted into renewed gossip. Clara could hear the voices rising, the speculation beginning, the story being shaped into something ugly before it had even finished unfolding. She didn't look back. Mrs. Griswold waited at the boarding house entrance, her arms crossed, her expression promising trouble. She was a narrow woman in every sense, narrow body, narrow mind, narrow capacity for human kindness. I don't allow men in my female tenants' rooms, she announced before they'd even reached the steps. You know the rules, Clara. This is a respectable establishment. The baby is dying, Clara said simply. We need privacy. I'll pay whatever extra you require. Mrs. Griswold's eyes narrowed further, calculating. $5. The amount was obscene, more than a week's earnings from bread sales. Clara heard Evan's sharp intake of breath beside her. I'll pay it, he said, reaching for his pocket. No. Clara kept her eyes on the landlady. I'll pay it. This is my choice. My responsibility. She pulled the pouch from her apron, counted out coins that represented food she wouldn't buy, security she wouldn't have. Mrs. Griswold snatched them with the efficiency of someone who'd spent a lifetime profiting from others' desperation. 1 hour, the landlady said. After that, I charge by the half hour. Clara didn't respond. She simply turned and led Evan up the narrow stairs to the second floor, down the hallway to the very last door. Her door. Her 8x10 world of survival. The room was exactly as she'd left it that morning. A narrow bed pushed against one wall, its quilt her own work, patches of fabric salvaged from dresses she'd worn in better days. A small table held her mixing bowl, her wooden spoon, the jar where she kept her sourdough starter alive. A single window, curtainless, looked out onto the alley where nothing ever happened. A washstand, a chamber pot, a trunk containing everything she owned. Clara closed the door behind them, shutting out the world in its judgment. Evan stood in the center of the room, still holding his daughter, looking lost in a way that went beyond physical displacement. I don't know what to do, he whispered. I don't know how to help her. I've tried everything. Cow's milk, goat's milk, sugar water. Nothing works. She just keeps getting weaker. And I can't lose her. I can't. She's all I have left of Sarah. She's all I have left of anything good. Clara moved to the bed, settling herself against the headboard. Her hands trembled as she began unbuttoning the front of her dress. Bring her here. Evan approached like a man walking on ice, each step careful, reverent. He knelt beside the bed, easing the baby into Clara's outstretched arms. The weight of her was nothing, 4 pounds, maybe less. Clara could feel every tiny bone, every desperate breath. The baby's eyes opened, focusing on Clara's face with the kind of intensity that seemed impossible from something so fragile. Hello, little one, Clara whispered, her voice catching. Let's see if we can help each other. She adjusted her dress, exposing her breast. The tingling sensation had grown stronger, accompanied now by actual wetness. Milk. After 2 years of drought, her body was producing milk. The baby turned her head, searching with instinct older than thought. Clara guided her, positioned her, waited for the latch that might never come. For a long moment, nothing happened. The baby's mouth opened and closed against Clara's skin, weak movements that accomplished nothing. Clara felt despair rising. Of course this wouldn't work. Of course her body would fail again. Of course she'd offered hope she couldn't deliver. Then the latch came. The baby's mouth sealed around Clara's nipple with sudden desperate strength. The pull was sharp, almost painful after so long. But Clara didn't flinch. She felt the milk let down, a sensation like nothing else, like opening a door that had been locked for years. The baby drank. Evan made a sound, half sob, half laugh, and buried his face against the mattress. His shoulders shook with the force of relief too powerful to contain. Clara kept her eyes on the infant in her arms, watching color slowly return to gray skin, watching the frantic desperation ease into focused purpose. The baby's eyes drifted closed. Her tiny hand, which had been clenched tight, relaxed against Clara's breast. Minutes passed. The room filled with the only sound that mattered, the soft, rhythmic pattern of suckling and swallowing, of life being sustained, of connection being forged through the most primal act of motherhood. When the baby's sucking finally slowed, Clara gently detached her and shifted her to the other breast. The latch came easier this time. The baby drank with less desperation now, more contentment. Evan had lifted his head and was watching them with an expression Clara couldn't fully read. Gratitude, certainly, but also something else. Recognition, maybe, or reverence. "What's her name?" Clara asked softly. "Rose." Evan's voice was rough. Sarah wanted to name her Rose. She said, he stopped, swallowed hard. She said every rose has thorns, but that doesn't make it any less beautiful. That survival doesn't diminish worth. Rose, Clara repeated, looking down at the infant whose eyes had drifted fully closed now, whose breathing had deepened into something approaching sleep. It suits her. She's a fighter. She is. Evan shifted, settling from kneeling to sitting on the floor beside the bed. Just like her mother was. Sarah fought so hard. For 3 days she fought. The midwife said the baby was positioned wrong, that Sarah's hips were too narrow, that it was hopeless from the start. But Sarah wouldn't give up. She kept pushing, kept trying, kept believing she could bring Rose into the world and survive to raise her. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. She managed half of that. Clara felt the weight of his grief like a physical presence in the small room. I'm sorry for your loss. Everyone says that. Bitterness crept into Evan's tone. But no one actually cares. They're too busy deciding I'm responsible, that I did something wrong, that I'm dangerous. The doctor from Cheyenne came a week after Sarah died, wanted to make sure Rose was healthy. He examined her, declared her fine, and left. But he must have said something in town, because after that the whispers got worse. People started saying I'd hurt Sarah, that I'd caused the difficult birth, that I was keeping Rose isolated because I was doing the same to her. That's why they wouldn't help you. That's why they wouldn't help her. The distinction mattered to him. Rose hasn't done anything wrong. She's innocent. But they'd rather let her die than risk being associated with me. Clara understood that particular cruelty intimately. The world is very good at punishing people for things beyond their control. Evan's eyes met hers. What did you do? To deserve the way they treat you? The question should have felt invasive, but Clara found she didn't mind answering. Maybe it was the intimacy of the moment, or the shared understanding of exile, or simply the relief of being asked directly instead of whispered about. I had a baby who died, and then I had a husband who couldn't forgive me for it. That's not your fault. I know. Clara's honesty surprised even herself. But knowing something logically doesn't change how the world treats you. The town decided I was cursed, that my body was wrong, that I was someone to avoid. And once that judgment is passed, nothing you do can overturn it. You just learn to survive within its boundaries. Is that what you've been doing? Surviving? Clara looked down at Rose, whose face had relaxed completely into sleep, whose tiny hand had uncurled to rest against Clara's skin. It was, until about 20 minutes ago. Understanding passed between them without need for further words. Something had shifted for both of them in this small room. The future Clara had resigned herself to, endless days of invisible survival, of existing without claiming existence, had just become impossible. Whatever happened next, she could never return to that corner of the market square and pretend nothing had changed. Rose stirred, making small sounds in her sleep. Clara gently stroked her cheek, marveling at the softness of infant skin, at the miracle of this tiny life still holding on. She'll need to eat again soon, Clara said quietly. Newborns eat every few hours, and she's so small she'll probably need to eat more frequently than that. Evan's face fell. I have to get back to the ranch. I've got livestock, fences down, 1,000 things that can't wait. I was going to head back today, try to find someone, anyone, who would help. But there's no one within 50 miles who'd be willing. I've already tried. Silence stretched between them, heavy with implications neither wanted to voice. Finally, Clara spoke the truth they'd both been avoiding. She'll die if she doesn't eat regularly. If you take her back to the ranch without... She couldn't finish the sentence. I know. Evan's voice was hollow. I know, but what choice do I have? I can't stay in town. I've got responsibilities. And I can't ask you to. I mean, you've already done more than I had any right to expect. You've given us this chance. I can't ask for more. You're not asking, Clara said softly. I'm offering. Evan's head snapped up. What? Bring me to the ranch. The words came out steady, certain, despite the chaos they would unleash. Bring me with you. Let me help Rose until she's strong enough to manage without. Let me do this one thing right. Clara. Evan's use of her name felt shockingly intimate. Do you understand what you're saying? The gossip alone would destroy what little standing you have left in this town. And Mrs. Griswold, she'll never let you back if you leave with me. You'll lose your room, your livelihood, everything. What livelihood? Clara's laugh held no humor. Selling bread to people who can't stand to look at me? Living in a room that costs me everything I earn? Existing in a town that's made it clear I'm only tolerated, never welcomed? That's not a life worth protecting. But if this doesn't work, if Rose doesn't make it anyway, you'll have given up everything for nothing. Clara met his eyes directly. And if I don't try, I'll spend the rest of my life knowing I let another baby die because I was too afraid to risk my own comfort. I can't do that again, Evan. I can't carry that weight twice. Rose chose that moment to wake, her mouth immediately searching for Clara's breast again. Clara adjusted her dress, helped her latch, watched her drink with the same desperate intensity as before. How long would you need? Evan asked quietly. How long before we'd know if she can survive? A month, maybe. Clara tried to calculate based on knowledge she'd gathered from other women, from conversations she'd been excluded from but had overheard. Long enough to get her weight up, to make sure she can tolerate milk, to see if she can thrive. After that, you could probably transition her to cow's milk mixed with other things. There are formulas, ways to make it work. A month. Evan processed this, his expression cycling through hope, fear, calculation. I can manage a month. I can hire someone to help with the heavy work, or let things slide that can wait. But Clara, are you sure? Are you absolutely certain you want to do this? Clara thought about the market square, about her corner table, about 2 years of careful invisibility. She thought about Mrs. Griswold's narrow face, about the boarding house room that had become both shelter and prison. She thought about the loaves of bread she'd bake and sell to people who'd never invite her to their tables. Then she looked at Rose, whose eyes had opened and were fixed on her face with absolute trust, and she knew the only answer possible. I'm certain. Evan nodded slowly, his jaw tightening with emotion he was working hard to control. Then we'll go tomorrow morning, first light. I'll pay Mrs. Griswold whatever she demands for your lost rent. I'll hire a wagon to get us back to the ranch, and I'll pay you whatever you think is fair for— No. Clara's interruption was gentle but firm. This isn't about money. You have to eat. You have to have something when this is over. Then pay me room and board, nothing more. Clara shifted Rose to her shoulder, gently patting her back until a tiny burp emerged. I'm not doing this as hired help. I'm doing this because it's the right thing to do, because Rose deserves a chance, because I can give her one. Evan stood, his movements slow, almost reverent. He reached out, his calloused hand hovering near Rose's head, then settling gently on her wispy hair. Thank you, he whispered. I don't have better words. I don't know how to express— Thank you. Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. They stayed like that for another hour, Clara feeding Rose twice more, Evan sitting on the floor beside the bed, both of them silent except for the occasional murmured observation. Outside, the sun began its descent, painting the alley in amber light. In the boarding house, footsteps and voices created the soundtrack of other people's lives continuing. When Mrs. Griswold's sharp knock finally came at the door, Clara was ready. Time's up, the landlady called. Unless you've got another $5. Clara called Rose, who'd fallen into deep sleep, warm and milk-drunk against her chest. She buttoned her dress carefully, then looked at Evan. Tomorrow morning, first light. First light, he confirmed, taking Rose gently into his arms. The baby barely stirred, content in a way she hadn't been when he'd first carried her into the market square. At the door, Evan paused. Whatever happens next, Clara, whatever people say or do, you should know this. You saved her life today. You gave us both a future we didn't have 6 hours ago. That matters. That will always matter, regardless of what comes after. Clara watched him descend the stairs, Rose secure in his arms, moving with the careful determination of a man carrying something infinitely precious. Mrs. Griswold stood at the bottom, her expression sour but silent. She'd been paid, and that was all that mattered to her. When the front door closed behind them, Clara returned to her room and sat on the bed that still held the warmth of where they'd been. Her body felt strange, alert, alive, purposeful in ways she'd forgotten were possible. Her breasts ached with fullness, with the knowledge that they'd successfully fed a starving infant, that they'd proven themselves capable after 2 years of being branded as failures. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the alley where shadows were lengthening. Tomorrow, she'd pack everything she owned into a single trunk. Tomorrow, she'd walk out of this boarding house and this town without looking back. Tomorrow, she'd begin a journey that might end in failure or might end in something she didn't yet have words to name. But tonight, Clara Whitmore sat in her small room and felt something she hadn't felt since the day she'd buried her son. Hope. The first pale light of dawn found Clara already awake, sitting on the edge of her bed with her trunk open before her. She'd spent the night in restless half-sleep, her body responding to phantom cries, her breasts letting down milk for a baby who wasn't there. The sensation was both foreign and achingly familiar, as if her body remembered what her mind had tried to forget. She packed methodically, folding each item with care despite knowing most wouldn't survive the journey in pristine condition. Her 3 dresses, the calico she'd worn yesterday, a dark wool for winter, and a faded cotton she used for baking. Her spare apron, her nightgown, the quilt from her bed. The ribbon she'd hidden in her drawer, still never worn. Her mixing bowl and wooden spoon, the sourdough starter sealed carefully in its jar, wrapped in cloth to prevent breaking. A hairbrush with missing bristles. The small Bible that had been her mother's, though Clara hadn't opened it in years. At the bottom of the trunk, wrapped in her wedding dress that she couldn't bear to sell or wear, was the tiny gown she'd sewn for her son, the only thing of his that remained. She left the gown where it was, buried beneath fabric and memory. By the time the boarding house began to stir with morning sounds, Clara had washed, dressed in her sturdiest clothes, and braided her hair with fingers that barely trembled. She stood at the window watching the sky lighten from black to deep blue, to the particular shade of gray that promised a clear autumn day. Hoofbeats on the street below brought her to attention. Through the window, she saw Evan pulling a wagon to a stop in front of the boarding house. The wagon was rough but sturdy, its bed filled with hay to cushion the journey. Rose lay in a wooden box that had been padded with blankets, creating a makeshift bassinet secured to prevent sliding. Clara picked up her trunk, lighter than it should be for a life's possessions, and headed downstairs before Mrs. Griswold could emerge to complicate the departure with demands for additional payment. But the landlady was already waiting in the hallway, her arms crossed, her expression calculating. "Leaving without notice, Clara? That's a breach of our agreement. I'll need 2 weeks' rent to cover the inconvenience." "Our agreement was week to week," Clara said quietly. "I paid through yesterday." "The agreement was also that you'd maintain the respectability of my establishment. Running off with a man in the middle of the night—" "It's dawn," Clara interrupted, her voice still quiet but carrying an edge it never had before. "And I'm not running off with anyone. I'm accepting employment as a wet nurse for an infant who would otherwise die. Unless you're suggesting I should let a baby starve to preserve your establishment's reputation?" Mrs. Griswold's mouth thinned. "That baby's father is a desperate man trying to save his daughter's life." Clara shifted the trunk's weight in her arms. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a wagon waiting." She moved past the landlady without waiting for permission, down the narrow stairs through the front door that had marked the boundary of her small world for 2 years. The morning air hit her face, cool and sharp, carrying the scent of wood smoke and dust and possibility. Evan was waiting beside the wagon, his hat in his hands, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. He'd clearly been awake all night as well. His eyes were red-rimmed, his jaw shadowed with 2 days' growth of beard. But when he saw Clara emerge, something in his expression lightened. "You came," he said, as if he'd genuinely doubted she would. "I said I would." Clara moved to the wagon, peering into the box where Rose slept. The baby's color was better than yesterday, her breathing deeper. She'd survived the night, which felt like its own small miracle. Evan took Clara's trunk, lifting it easily into the wagon bed. "She woke twice, cried for about 20 minutes each time. I tried the sugar water again, but she wouldn't take it. I thought—" His voice caught. "I thought maybe yesterday was a fluke, that maybe it wouldn't work again, that I'd made you give up everything for nothing." "But you came anyway," Clara observed. "I had to try." He secured the trunk with rope. Even if there was only a chance, I had to give her that chance. Clara climbed into the wagon seat, settling her skirts around her. Evan swung up beside her, taking the reins with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent his life working with horses. The wagon lurched forward, wheels creaking, and Clara felt the last thread connecting her to Millridge stretch and then snap cleanly. They rode in silence through the awakening town. A few early risers saw them pass. Old Mr. Henderson opening his shop, the baker's apprentice carrying wood for the ovens, Martha Sullivan emptying a wash basin from her porch. Each face registered recognition, then shock, then the kind of knowing disapproval that would fuel gossip for weeks. Clara kept her eyes forward. Let them talk. Let them spin whatever stories made them feel superior. She was beyond their judgment now, beyond the careful dance of trying to earn back respect she'd never be granted. The freedom of it was dizzying. They cleared the last buildings of Millridge and headed into open country. The road to Evans Ranch cut through rolling grassland dotted with pine and aspen, climbing gradually into foothills that would eventually meet the true mountains. The morning sun broke over the eastern horizon, painting everything in shades of amber and rose gold. Rose woke as the wagon hit a particularly rough patch of road, her cries immediate and insistent. Clara reached back, lifting her from the bassinet with care. Even after just one day, the weight of her felt familiar in Clara's arms, the shape of her body already memorized. "Can you manage while I'm driving?" Evan asked, keeping his eyes on the road, but his voice tight with concern. "I've done harder things," Clara said, though in truth she wasn't certain. She settled Rose against her chest, managing to unbutton her dress one-handed while the wagon jostled over ruts and stones. The baby latched immediately, drinking with the same desperate focus as yesterday. Evan glanced over, and Clara saw relief flood his features. "Every time she feeds, I think it might be the last time it works. That your body might decide it's done, that—" "Bodies are strange," Clara said, watching Rose's tiny hand knead against her breast. "They remember things we'd rather forget. They hold on to purposes we thought we'd lost." She paused, feeling the pull of Rose's suckling, the strange comfort of being needed in such an elemental way. Mine apparently remembered how to do this, even after 2 years of pretending it had forgotten. "How did you survive it?" The question was quiet, almost hesitant. "Losing your baby, your husband. How did you keep going?" Clara considered lying, offering some platitude about strength or faith, or the passage of time. But Evan had been honest with her about Sarah, about his own grief, and he deserved the same honesty in return. "I didn't keep going, not really. I just kept breathing. Breathing, baking, existing. I stopped being a person and became a function, someone who produced bread, who occupied space, who survived without living. I thought that was all I deserved, all I was capable of." "But you don't think that anymore?" "I don't know what I think anymore." Clara looked down at Rose, whose eyes had drifted closed again, milk-drunk and content. "Yesterday morning, I knew exactly who I was and what my life would be. Today, I'm riding in a wagon toward a place I've never seen to help a man I barely know, caring for a baby who isn't mine. Everything I thought was certain has become uncertain. It's terrifying, and—" She stopped, surprised by her own words. "And it's the most alive I've felt since Robert died." Evan nodded slowly, his hand steady on the reins. "Sarah used to say that grief doesn't actually kill you, even when you wish it would. It just changes the shape of your life into something you don't recognize. She'd lost her parents young, her brother to fever. She understood about becoming a different person than you'd planned to be." "You loved her very much." "I did." The admission came without hesitation. "I still do. I always will. But I'm learning that love doesn't stop when someone dies. It just becomes something you carry instead of something you share. Sarah wanted Rose to live. She fought so hard to give her that chance. Honoring that, keeping Rose alive, that's how I love Sarah now." They rode in comfortable silence after that, the wagon following the climbing road as the sun rose higher. The landscape shifted around them, grassland giving way to forest, the air growing cooler and thinner, the distant mountains becoming closer and more defined. Clara fed Rose twice more during the journey, each time marveling at her own body's capacity to provide, at the way this tiny life depended entirely on what Clara could offer. It was late morning when Evan guided the wagon off the main road onto a narrow track that wound through dense pine forest. "Almost there," he said, and Clara heard both anticipation and apprehension in his voice. The trees opened suddenly onto a valley that took Clara's breath away. A wide meadow, autumn gold, stretched toward mountains that rose like cathedral walls. A creek cut through the center, catching sunlight like scattered diamonds. And at the valley's heart sat a cabin, not large, but solidly built from pine logs, with a stone chimney and a covered porch. But the valley's beauty couldn't hide the evidence of struggle. Fences sagged or lay broken in several places. The barn door hung crooked on its hinges. Weeds had overtaken what looked like it had once been a kitchen garden. Scattered tools, a wagon wheel, various items that should have been stored away, all spoke of a household that had stopped functioning. Evan saw her taking it in, and his jaw tightened. I know it's rough. I've been trying to keep up with the essential work, feeding livestock, basic repairs, but there's only so much one man can do when he's also trying to keep an infant alive on sugar water and prayer. It's beautiful, Claire said, and meant it. The disrepair was superficial, fixable. The land itself was magnificent. Rich soil, good water, shelter from the worst winds. How long have you been here? 3 years. Sarah and I bought it from a trapper who wanted to move further west. We spent 2 years making it livable, building the barn, clearing land for crops. We were going to run cattle, maybe sheep. We had plans for... His voice roughened. We had a lot of plans. The wagon rolled to a stop in front of the cabin. 2 horses nickered from a corral beside the barn, and Clara could hear chickens clucking somewhere out of sight. Signs of life, even amid the chaos of loss. Evan climbed down and came around to help Clara from the wagon seat. His hands at her waist were careful, respectful, lifting her as if she weighed nothing despite her size. The ground felt unsteady under her feet after hours of wagon motion. Let me show you inside, Evan said, reaching back to lift Rose's bassinet. It's not much, but... Stop apologizing, Clara said gently. You're doing the best you can under impossible circumstances. No one expects perfection from a man trying to survive grief and raise an infant alone. The cabin's interior was dim and cool, sunlight filtering through windows that desperately needed washing. The main room served as kitchen and living space. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, a rough-hewn table and chairs sat in the center. A cook stove stood near the far wall with a pile of unwashed dishes beside it. Shelves held supplies, though they looked poorly organized and half-empty. A rocking chair sat near the fireplace, a woman's shawl still draped over its back. 2 doors led to what Clara assumed were bedrooms. Evan moved to the nearest one, pushing it open to reveal a small room with a narrow bed, a dresser, and a window overlooking the meadow. This was going to be the nursery. I've been sleeping in here with Rose in case something happened during the night. Clara stepped into the room, setting her carpet bag on the dresser. The space was spare but clean, the bed made with military precision, the floor swept. Whatever chaos ruled the rest of the house, Evan had kept this room, Rose's room, in order. Where will you sleep? She asked. The other bedroom. It's larger, but I haven't... He stopped, swallowed. That was the room Sarah and I shared. I haven't been able to go back in there. Not yet. Understanding passed between them without need for further explanation. Clara nodded. Then you'll stay there, and I'll stay here with Rose. That way I can feed her when she wakes without disturbing you. You need actual sleep, Evan. You're running on fumes. I can't ask you to take night duty. You need rest too. I'm waking anyway, Clara said truthfully. Her body was already attuned to Rose's schedule, her breasts waking her before the baby's cries even started. Let me do this. Let me help in the way that makes sense. Evan looked like he wanted to argue, but was too exhausted to manage it. All right, but if it becomes too much, you tell me. Deal? Deal. Rose chose that moment to wake, her cries starting soft and building to insistent demand. Clara lifted her from the bassinet, settling into the rocking chair that must have been Sarah's. The shawl still smelled faintly of lavender and some other scent Clara couldn't identify. The ghost of a woman who'd rocked in this chair while pregnant, dreaming of the child she'd soon hold. Clara fed Rose while Evan unloaded the wagon, his boots heavy on the porch, his movements visible through the window. She watched him work with the kind of tired determination that spoke of months of forcing himself to keep going. When he came back inside, she was burping Rose against her shoulder. I'll get you something to eat, Evan said, moving to the stove. It won't be fancy. I'm not much of a cook. I can cook, Clara offered. Once Rose is settled, I can... You're here to care for her, not to be my housekeeper. I'm here to help keep this household running so Rose has a chance to survive, Clara corrected. That means feeding her, yes, but it also means making sure you're eating properly, that the house doesn't fall apart around us, that we're all taking care of each other. You can't care for Rose if you're collapsing from exhaustion and malnutrition. Evan stared at her, something complicated moving across his face. When you put it that way. Besides, Clara added, settling Rose back in her bassinet as the baby drifted into sleep, I like cooking. It gives me something to do with my hands, something productive. She moved to the stove, surveying the available supplies with a practiced eye. Flour, cornmeal, dried beans, salt pork, a few sorry-looking potatoes, coffee that smelled stale. The larder of a man too busy surviving to think about proper meals. When was the last time you ate something that wasn't beans or hardtack? She asked. Evan had to think about it. I honestly don't remember. Clara began pulling ingredients together, her hands moving with the confidence of long practice. Then today you're getting real food. Go tend your animals. I'll call you when it's ready. For a moment she thought he might argue, but then he simply nodded, grabbed his hat, and headed outside. Through the window, Clara watched him walk to the barn with the gait of a man carrying weight that went beyond the physical. She worked efficiently, building a fire in the stove, mixing cornbread batter, setting beans to soak for tomorrow, frying salt pork until the cabin filled with savory smoke. The motions were meditative, familiar, grounding her in this strange new reality. Rose woke twice more while Clara cooked, each feeding becoming smoother, more natural. Clara found herself talking to the baby as she ate, her voice soft and continuous. Your papa is a good man, little Rose. He's tired and sad and carrying more than anyone should have to carry, but he's good. He loves you so much. Fought for you when the whole world said you weren't worth fighting for. She stroked Rose's downy hair. Your mama must have been something special too, to have a man love her this much even after she's gone. I hope you grow up to be like her, strong, brave, worth fighting for. The door opened and Evan stepped inside, bringing the scent of hay and horses. He stopped when he saw the table, cornbread, fried pork, coffee, the simple meal arranged like it mattered. When did you... He gestured helplessly at the food. You were gone for an hour, Clara said, setting Rose back in her bassinet. Sit. Eat while it's hot. They sat across from each other at the rough table, and for several minutes the only sound was eating. Evan consumed his food with the focused intensity of someone who'd been running on empty for too long. Clara ate more slowly, watching him, measuring his exhaustion against her own. This is good, Evan said finally, pushing his empty plate back. Really good. I'd forgotten food could taste like something other than obligation. It's just cornbread and pork. It's the first real meal I've had since Sarah... He stopped, cleared his throat. Thank you. Clara began clearing the table, stacking dishes beside the wash basin. Tomorrow I'll inventory what you have and make a list of what we need. If you're going into town... I'm not going into town, Evan said flatly. I'm not setting foot in Millridge again if I can help it. Then we'll need to find another option. There must be a trading post, another town, somewhere you can get supplies without... Pine Ridge, it's about 15 miles south. Small settlement, but they have a general store. The trader there doesn't ask questions, doesn't judge. I can go there. All right. Clara filed this information away. Then we'll make it work. The afternoon passed in the kind of domestic routine that felt both foreign and achingly familiar. Clara washed dishes while Evan repaired the barn door. She fed Rose while he checked fence lines. She started bread dough rising while he brought in firewood. They moved around each other with the careful courtesy of strangers sharing space, each conscious of boundaries not yet established. As evening approached, Evan came inside to find Clara kneading bread at the table, Rose asleep in her bassinet nearby. He stood in the doorway, watching, and Clara felt the weight of his gaze. What? She asked without stopping her work. It's just seeing someone else in this house, hearing sounds that aren't me or Rose. It's strange. Good strange, but strange. Clara shaped the dough into loaves, set them in pans to rise. I imagine everything feels strange right now. Your whole life turned upside down in a matter of weeks. It did. Evan moved to the rocking chair, sinking into it with a groan of exhausted muscles. But this, having you here, having help, not being alone with it all, that's the first thing that's felt right since Sarah died. The honesty in his voice made Clara pause. She wiped flour from her hands, turned to face him. We should talk about expectations, about how this arrangement works. All right. I'm here to care for Rose until she's strong enough to manage without me. That's the primary purpose. Everything else, cooking, cleaning, helping with the household, that's secondary. If at any point you feel uncomfortable with the arrangement, or if the gossip becomes too much, or if... Clara. Evan's interruption was gentle. I don't care about gossip. I don't care what people in Millridge think or say. The only thing I care about is keeping Rose alive. If having you here accomplishes that, then this arrangement is worth whatever judgment comes with it. And when she doesn't need me anymore? When a month has passed and she's thriving and I've served my purpose? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither was ready to examine. I don't know, Evan said finally. I guess we'll figure it out when we get there. But Clara, even when Rose doesn't need you anymore, that doesn't mean... He stopped, seemed to reconsider his words. You'll always have a place here. Always. Regardless of what happens with Rose. I want you to know that. Clara felt something shift in her chest, some careful guard she'd maintained beginning to crack. Why? You don't owe me anything. This was my choice. Because you gave up everything to help a stranger's child. Because you showed mercy when the whole world showed cruelty. Because... Evan's voice roughened. Because kindness is rare out here, Clara. Real kindness. The kind that costs something. And when you find it, you don't let it go. Darkness had fallen while they talked. The cabin illuminated only by firelight. In the dimness, with Rose sleeping peacefully and the bread rising and the day's work done, Clara felt the first stirrings of something she'd thought long dead. Not hope exactly. Not yet. But possibility. The thought of a future that extended beyond survival, beyond bread tables and corner invisibility, beyond the careful management of existing without living. I should get Rose ready for bed, Clara said softly, needing to move to break the intensity of the moment. Evan nodded, pushing himself up from the rocking chair. And I should check the animals one more time, make sure everything's secure for the night. He paused at the door, his hand on the frame. Clara, thank you for being here, for giving us this chance. Thank you for letting me, she replied. After he left, Clara changed Rose into a clean gown, marveling at how the baby had already begun to fill out slightly, how her skin held more color, how her cries had grown stronger. She fed her one more time, watching the infant's eyes grow heavy, feeling the pull of her own exhaustion. When Evan returned, Clara was settling Rose into the bassinet, tucking blankets around her with care. Sleep well, Evan said quietly from the doorway. If you need anything. I'll be fine, Clara assured him. We both will. She listened to his footsteps crossing to the other bedroom, heard the door close softly. Then the house fell into the particular silence of night, broken only by the crackle of dying fire, and Rose's soft breathing. Clara lay in the narrow bed, her body exhausted but her mind racing. She thought about the market square, about Mrs. Griswold's narrow face, about 2 years of careful invisibility. She thought about this gossip that was certainly spreading through Millridge even now, about reputation and respectability and all the things she'd supposedly sacrificed. But mostly she thought about the weight of Rose in her arms, about the miracle of milk flowing from her body after years of drought, about Evan's words, "You'll always have a place here," and what they might mean. Outside, an owl called. The mountains stood silent against the stars, and in a small cabin in a beautiful valley, 3 damaged souls began the slow, uncertain work of healing. Clara woke 3 times that first night, her body responding to Rose's needs before the baby's cries fully formed. Each time she rose in the darkness, lit the small lamp beside the bed, and fed Rose while the cabin settled around them in creaks and whispers. Each time she heard Evan's door open slightly, heard him pause in the hallway as if checking that everything was all right, then heard him retreat back to his room. He was listening, she realized, keeping watch even in his exhaustion, unable to fully surrender his vigilance. By the time dawn broke over the mountains, painting the meadow in shades of rose and gold, Clara had been awake for an hour. She'd fed Rose, changed her, and was sitting in the rocking chair watching the sunrise when Evan emerged from his bedroom, his hair disheveled, his shirt half-buttoned. "You're up early," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "So are you." "Ranch habits. Animals don't care if you've had a rough night." He moved to the stove, stirring the coals back to life. "How was she?" "Good. Fed 3 times, slept between feedings. She's getting stronger already." Clara shifted Rose to her shoulder, patting her back gently. "You need to stop checking on us every time she cries. You'll never get proper rest." Evan paused in the act of adding wood to the stove. "You heard that?" The floorboards creak. "And you're not as quiet as you think you are." A slight smile crossed his face, the first genuine one Clara had seen. "Sarah used to say the same thing, said I moved through the house like a bear trying to tiptoe." The mention of his wife came easier this morning, Clara noted. Less like touching an open wound, more like acknowledging a presence that lingered in corners and objects and the very air of the cabin. "Tell me about her," Clara said. "If you want to." Evan finished building the fire, then settled at the table with his coffee. For a long moment he was silent, his hands wrapped around the tin cup as if drawing warmth from it. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the careful quality of someone handling something precious. "She was small, barely came up to my shoulder. Dark hair, darker eyes, quick to laugh, and quicker to call out foolishness when she saw it. Her father had been a trader, taught her to read and figure numbers better than most men I knew. When I met her in Cheyenne, she was working as a clerk in a dry goods store, and I thought she was the most competent person I'd ever encountered." He paused, his thumb tracing the rim of his cup. "I knew within a week I wanted to marry her. Took me 3 months to work up the courage to ask." "What did she say?" "She said yes, but only if I promised we'd build something real together. Not her helping my dream, not me funding hers, but something we created equally. So we bought this land, built this cabin, planned this life as partners." His voice roughed. 17 months of marriage. That's all we got. 17 months of actual partnership before... He didn't finish, didn't need to. Clara rocked gently, feeling Rose's weight against her, her warmth, her absolute dependence. "She sounds remarkable." She was, and she would have loved Rose so much. Would have been such a good mother. Evan set down his cup with deliberate care. "Sometimes I'm angry at her for dying, for leaving me alone with this. Then I feel guilty for being angry, because she didn't choose it, didn't want it. It's complicated." "Grief usually is," Clara said quietly. "It's never just sadness. It's anger and guilt and relief and shame all tangled together until you can't tell where one feeling ends and another begins." Evan's eyes met hers across the dimly lit room. "You understand." "I do." They sat in the comfortable silence of shared understanding until Rose began to fuss, demanding attention that transcended past losses and present complications. Clara fed her while Evan headed out to tend the animals, and the day began its slow unfurling. The week that followed established rhythms that began to feel less like survival and more like actual living. Clara fed Rose every few hours, her body responding with increasing abundance, her milk coming in fuller and richer. The baby thrived visibly, her face filling out, her cries growing stronger, her periods of wakefulness extending. Clara found herself talking to Rose constantly, narrating her actions, singing half-remembered lullabies, filling the cabin with sound that felt like warmth. Between feedings, Clara worked. She scrubbed dishes that had accumulated for weeks, swept floors, washed windows until sunlight poured through clean glass. She inventoried the larder, making careful lists of what they needed and what could wait. She baked bread, cooked meals that actually required more than one pot, restored order to a household that had been running on chaos and desperation. Evan worked from dawn until dusk, repairing fences, tending livestock, catching up on months of deferred maintenance. But he came inside for meals now, sat at the table Clara had begun to set with care, ate food that nourished rather than simply sustained. He began to look less gaunt, less haunted, though the grief still shadowed his eyes. They developed patterns of coexistence, learning each other's habits and boundaries. Evan rose first, started the fire, brought in fresh water from the creek. Clara made coffee, prepared breakfast, fed Rose while Evan ate. During the day, they worked in parallel orbits, occasionally intersecting when Clara needed something moved or Evan needed something mended. Evenings found them in the main room together, Clara sewing or working with bread dough, while Evan handled small repairs or simply sat in exhausted silence. They talked more than Clara had expected, conversations starting hesitantly and gradually finding comfort. Evan spoke about the ranch, about his plans for the land, about the difficulties of working alone. Clara spoke about her life before Robert, about learning to bake from her mother, about the simple pleasure of creating something with her own hands. They didn't speak much about their losses directly, but the understanding of shared grief underlay everything, a foundation that made honesty possible. On the fourth day, disaster arrived in the form of Mrs. Harriet Pemberton. Claire was hanging laundry on a line Evan had strung between two pines when she heard the wagon approaching. She turned, shielding her eyes against the midday sun, and felt her stomach drop. The woman climbing down from the wagon was dressed in expensive traveling clothes, her gray hair pinned in an elaborate style, her expression carrying the particular combination of determination and disapproval that marked certain kinds of church women. Behind her, two men climbed down, her sons, Clara guessed from the resemblance. Big men, both of them, with faces that suggested they weren't accustomed to hearing the word no. Evan emerged from the barn, his posture immediately defensive. "Mrs. Pemberton, what brings you all the way out here?" "Concern for a child's welfare," the woman replied, her voice carrying the crisp authority of someone used to being obeyed. "We heard disturbing reports from Millridge about your daughter's care, about the woman you've brought into your home." Clara felt the familiar shame begin to rise, the instinctive urge to make herself small, to apologize for existing. But then Rose's cry came from inside the cabin, and something in Clara hardened. She moved toward the door, intercepting Mrs. Pemberton's path. "The baby needs to be fed," Clara said evenly. "By you?" Mrs. Pemberton's gaze swept over Clara, taking in her size, her simple dress, her lack of obvious refinement. "I think not. We've come to take the child to proper care. There's a family in Pine Ridge, good Christian people, who've agreed to raise her. The wet nurse they've secured is respectable, married, of appropriate character." "Rose is staying here," Evan said, his voice carrying a warning edge. "With me. With us. Mr. Cole, be reasonable. You're a single man living in isolation with an unmarried woman of questionable reputation. This situation is inappropriate at best, dangerous at worst. The child deserves to live," Clara interrupted, surprising herself with the force in her voice, "which she wouldn't be doing if it weren't for the questionable woman standing in front of you. Every respectable person in Millridge turned their backs when she was dying. I was the only one who stepped forward, so you'll forgive me if I don't put much stock in your definition of appropriate character." Mrs. Pemberton's face flushed. "Your impertinence proves my point. No decent woman would speak to me in such a manner, and no decent man would allow his child to be raised in such an environment." "Then I guess I'm not a decent man," Evan said flatly. "Rose is my daughter. I decide what's best for her, and what's best is staying here with someone who's kept her alive when everyone else was content to let her die." "The law may see it differently," Mrs. Pemberton's voice took on a harder edge. "A judge might question a father's fitness when he's living in sin, when he's exposing an innocent child to moral corruption, when—" "We're not living in sin," Evan cut in. "Clara is my employee. She has her own room. Everything about this arrangement is proper." "Proper?" One of Mrs. Pemberton's sons laughed, the sound harsh. "A woman like her alone with you? Everyone knows what's really happening here." Clara felt the words hit like physical blows. Everyone knows. The old shame, the old judgment, repackaged and delivered with fresh cruelty. But then Evan stepped between Clara and the Pemberton men, his body a wall, his stance radiating barely controlled fury. "Say another word about her, and you'll leave this valley with fewer teeth than you arrived with." The air went taut with potential violence. Mrs. Pemberton's sons tensed, their hands moving toward their belts. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs, but she forced herself to stay still, to not show the fear that wanted to send her running. Mrs. Pemberton raised a hand, stopping her sons before things escalated. This isn't over, Mr. Cole. The church has a responsibility to protect innocent children from improper influences. We will be consulting with authorities about your daughter's welfare. I suggest you reconsider your position before legal intervention becomes necessary. Get off my land, Evan said, his voice cold as mountain snow. Now. Mrs. Pemberton climbed back into her wagon with rigid dignity, her sons following with obvious reluctance. As the wagon pulled away, Clara heard her voice carrying back across the meadow. Mark my words, that child will not remain in that house of sin. We'll see to that. The wagon disappeared into the trees, dust settling in its wake. Evan stood motionless for a long moment, his hands clenched into fists, his breathing harsh. Evan, Clara said softly. He turned, and she saw fear in his face, raw, undisguised terror. They'll take her. They'll find some judge, some law, some way to take her from me, and I can't. They won't. Clara moved to him, reaching out to touch his arm before she could second-guess the gesture. We won't let them. How do we stop them? You heard her. They'll claim I'm unfit, that the situation is inappropriate, that Rose deserves better. And a judge might agree. Judges tend to side with church women over unmarried ranchers. Clara's mind raced, turning over possibilities, examining options from every angle. The same calculating mind that had learned to survive in Millridge, that had found ways to exist within impossible boundaries, now turned its focus to this new problem. Then we make the situation appropriate, she said slowly, the solution forming even as she spoke. We eliminate their ammunition. How? Clara met his eyes directly, her heart pounding but her voice steady. We get married. The words hung in the air between them, enormous and impossible and absolutely logical. Evan stared at her. Clara, you can't be serious. Why not? They're coming after you because you're an unmarried man living with an unmarried woman. Take away that ammunition, and their case collapses. A married couple raising the man's daughter with the help of his wife? No judge would question that arrangement. But we barely know each other. We've been living under the same roof for less than a week, and He stopped, swallowed hard. Clara, I'm not asking you to sacrifice yourself on the altar of respectability. You've already given up too much. I'm not sacrificing anything, Clara said firmly. I'm making a choice, a strategic choice that benefits all of us. You get protection from people trying to take Rose. Rose gets to stay with her father, and I get... She paused, surprised by her own honesty. I get a place, a purpose, something more than corners and invisibility. It's not fair to you. Marriage should be about love, about choosing someone for who they are, not should be, Clara interrupted, but often isn't. How many marriages out here are strategic partnerships? How many people marry for land, for security, for survival? We'd at least be marrying for something good. For Rose. To protect a child and give her the family she deserves. Evan turned away, running his hands through his hair in a gesture of pure frustration. I can't ask this of you. You're not asking. I'm offering. But Clara, listen to me. Clara moved around to face him again. In the week I've been here, I've felt more useful, more alive, more like an actual person than I did in 2 years of carefully managed invisibility in Millridge. Rose needs me. You need help. And I need this. Need to matter. Need to be part of something bigger than my own survival. What about when Rose doesn't need you anymore? When she's thriving and you're tied to a marriage you entered out of necessity rather than choice? Clara considered this carefully, weighing her words. Then we'll figure it out. Maybe we become actual partners, building something real together. Maybe we remain friendly strangers sharing a household. Maybe we eventually go our separate ways. But right now, in this moment, marriage is the answer that keeps Rose safe and gives all of us a fighting chance. Evan searched her face, looking for something, doubt, resentment, fear. Clara kept her expression open, honest, letting him see that she meant every word. You deserve better than this, he said finally, his voice rough. So do you. So does Rose. But better isn't always available. Sometimes good enough is all we get, and we have to decide if it's worth fighting for. Rose's cries intensified from inside the cabin, demanding attention that couldn't wait for complicated adult decisions. Clara turned toward the door, pausing to look back at Evan. Think about it. But don't think too long. Mrs. Pemberton strikes me as the type who acts quickly on her threats. She went inside, lifted Rose from her bassinet, settled into the rocking chair to feed her. Through the window, she could see Evan standing in the yard, his posture rigid with tension, his face turned toward the mountains as if seeking answers in their ancient stone. Clara focused on Rose, on the immediate reality of a baby who needed care, who depended entirely on what Clara could provide. Whatever Evan decided, whatever happened next, this moment was real. This feeding, this connection, this purpose. The door opened an hour later. Evan stepped inside. His expression settled into something approaching calm resolution. He crossed to where Clara still sat with Rose, now drowsing milk-drunk against her chest. "If we do this," he said without preamble, "we do it right. Not some quick ceremony for show. We do it in front of witnesses, make it legal and binding, give them no ammunition whatsoever." Clara's heart kicked against her ribs. "You're saying yes?" "I'm saying you're right. It's the only way to keep Rose safe. The only way to protect all of us from whatever Mrs. Pemberton and her ilk decide to throw at us." He pulled out a chair, sat down heavily. "But Clara, I need you to understand something. I loved Sarah. I still love Sarah. I'm not asking you to love me," Clara said gently. "I'm asking you to partner with me, to build something functional and honest, even if it's not romantic. Plenty of marriages run on less. And if you meet someone someday, someone you could actually love?" The question surprised her. Clara looked down at Rose, thinking about probability and possibility, about what life had taught her about her own worth in the eyes of potential suitors. "I think we both know that's not particularly likely. I'm not the kind of woman men look at twice, Evan. I stopped believing in fairy tale endings a long time ago." "Don't say that," Evan said, his voice sharp. "Don't diminish yourself like that. Any man with eyes can see your—" He stopped, seeming to catch himself. "You're capable, strong, good. Those are worth more than any fairy tale." Clara felt warmth spread through her chest, unfamiliar and dangerous. She pushed it down, focusing on practical matters. "So we're agreed? We'll marry as soon as it can be arranged?" "We're agreed." Evan stood, moving to the window. "I'll ride to Pine Ridge tomorrow. Arrange for a circuit judge or a minister, whoever's available. We'll need witnesses. I can ask the Hendersons, the couple who run the trading post. They're decent people. They won't judge." "And Mrs. Pemberton?" "We'll invite her." Evan's voice carried grim satisfaction. "Make sure she sees exactly what she's failed to prevent. Show her that her threats accomplished nothing except pushing us into exactly the position she claimed to oppose." "That's playing with fire." "Maybe, but I'm tired of being pushed around by people who think their judgment gives them authority over my life. Over Rose's life, over yours." He turned back to face her. "We do this publicly. We make it clear and undeniable. We show them all that we're a family, legitimate in every way that matters." The word family echoed in Clara's mind, carrying weight she wasn't ready to fully examine. "All right, then we'll do it your way. Public, legal, undeniable." Evan left at dawn the next morning, riding out on his chestnut gelding with a promise to return by nightfall. Clara watched him go, then turned her attention to the cabin with new eyes. If this was going to be her home, truly her home, not just a temporary shelter, then it needed to reflect that reality. She worked with focused intensity, cleaning corners that hadn't seen attention in months, washing every dish until the shelves gleamed, scrubbing the floor until the wood grain showed through accumulated grime. She took down Sarah's shawl from the rocking chair, folded it carefully, placed it in a trunk that she carried to the larger bedroom. The door stood open for the first time since she'd arrived, revealing a space frozen in grief. The bed was made with perfect precision, the quilt tucked with military corners. Sarah's brush still sat on the dresser, strands of dark hair caught in its bristles. A woman's boots stood by the door, waiting for feet that would never fill them. Everywhere Clara looked, she saw evidence of a life interrupted, of plans abandoned mid-formation. She started to retreat, feeling like an intruder in a shrine. But then Rose began to cry, and Clara remembered why she was here, what she was fighting for. She collected Sarah's personal items with reverence: the brush, a small mirror, letters tied with ribbon, a locket containing a tiny daguerreotype of a young couple Clara assumed were Sarah's parents. She placed everything carefully in the trunk, speaking to the absent woman as she worked. I'm not trying to replace you. I could never replace you. But Rose needs a future, and Evan needs help building it. I promise I'll honor what you built here. I promise I'll take care of them both." By the time Evan returned that evening, the cabin had been transformed. Every surface gleamed. Fresh bread cooled on the table. The main room felt organized, functional. No longer a space where someone was barely surviving, but a home where people might actually live. Evan stopped in the doorway, his expression cycling through surprise and something that might have been grief. "You've been busy." "Too much?" Clara asked, suddenly uncertain. "If I overstepped—" "No." He shook his head, moving inside slowly, taking in the changes. "No, it's good. It's time." Sarah wouldn't have wanted the house to stay frozen like a tomb. She'd have wanted it to be useful, to serve the living. He paused by the rocking chair where Sarah's shawl had been. "Where did you—" "In the trunk, in your room, along with her other personal things. I thought you might want them kept together, kept safe." Evan nodded, his throat working. "Thank you for handling it with care." "Did you find someone?" Clara asked, needing to shift to safer ground. "Someone who can perform the ceremony?" "Judge Morrison. He's in Pine Ridge for another week, handling land disputes. He'll come out day after tomorrow, perform the ceremony, file the paperwork. I also talked to John Henderson at the trading post. He and his wife will stand as witnesses. They asked no questions, offered no judgment, just agreed to help." "And Mrs. Pemberton?" "I sent word with the judge, told her the date, the time, made it clear she's welcome to attend if she wishes to see exactly how inappropriate our household has become." Evan's voice carried dark humor. "Somehow, I doubt she'll take me up on the offer, but the invitation stands." Clara fed Rose while Evan ate the dinner she'd prepared, and they discussed logistics with the careful practicality of people planning a business arrangement rather than a wedding. Where would Clara sleep after the ceremony? They agreed she'd move into the larger bedroom, the one that had been Sarah's, while Evan would take the smaller room. What about household management? They'd continue as they had been, with Clara handling indoor work and Evan managing the land and livestock. What would they tell people about their relationship? The truth, mostly, that they'd married to provide stability for Rose and protection from those who'd use her welfare as excuse for interference. What they didn't discuss was what the marriage would actually mean beyond its legal and strategic functions. Whether they would share more than a household. Whether partnership might eventually become something deeper. Whether either of them wanted it to. Those questions hung in the air between them, unspoken but palpable, as the evening stretched toward night. 2 days later, Clara stood in the cabin's main room wearing the only dress she owned that wasn't completely faded. The dark wool she'd packed for winter, brushed clean and pressed as flat as she could manage. Her hair was braided and pinned, her hands scrubbed until they were raw. She looked nothing like a bride, felt nothing like someone about to embark on matrimony. But when Judge Morrison arrived with the Hendersons in tow, when Evan stood beside her in his cleanest shirt and nervously worked the brim of his hat between his hands, when Rose slept peacefully in her bassinet nearby, Clara felt something shift in her chest. This wasn't romance. This wasn't the future she'd once imagined, but it was real, and it was hers, and she was choosing it with open eyes. Judge Morrison was an older man with kind eyes and the weathered face of someone who'd spent decades witnessing frontier hardship. He spoke briefly about the seriousness of marriage, about the commitments being made, about the responsibilities being assumed. Then he asked the questions that would bind them. Evan Cole, do you take Clara Whitmore to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward? I do, Evan said, his voice steady. Clara Whitmore, do you take Evan Cole to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward? Clara looked at Evan, at his tired eyes and honest face, at the man who'd fought for his daughter when the world said she wasn't worth fighting for. She thought about Rose, about the life they might build together, about the possibility of purpose beyond mere survival. I do, she said clearly. Then, by the authority vested in me by the territory of Wyoming, I pronounce you husband and wife. No kiss, no rings, no celebration, just the scratch of the judge's pen as he filled out the marriage certificate, the Hendersons' signatures as witnesses, the legal transformation of 3 separate people into something that resembled a family. After the judge and the Hendersons departed with promises to spread word of the legitimate marriage, Clara and Evan stood in the cabin that was now legally as much hers as his, bound together by words and law and desperate necessity. "Well," Evan said finally, "I suppose that's done." "I suppose it is." They looked at each other across the space that separated them, husband and wife, strangers and partners, two people who'd made an impossible choice and would now have to live with its consequences. Outside, the sun continued its arc toward the mountains. Rose slept. The world kept turning. And in a small cabin in a beautiful valley, a marriage born of crisis began its first uncertain hours. The first week of marriage passed in careful politeness, both of them navigating new boundaries with the caution of people walking on ice. Clara moved her belongings into the larger bedroom, unpacking her few possessions into drawers that still smelled faintly of lavender. She hung her dresses beside empty space where Sarah's clothes had been, her 3 simple garments looking sparse and inadequate in the generous closet. At night she lay in a bed that had belonged to another woman, staring at ceiling beams Sarah must have studied during sleepless nights, and wondered what kind of ghost she was becoming in a dead woman's life. Evan took the smaller room without complaint, though Clara noticed he rarely closed the door completely, as if maintaining the illusion of temporary arrangement. They were scrupulously respectful of each other's privacy, knocking before entering rooms, averting eyes during moments of undress, maintaining the fiction that they were business partners sharing a household rather than husband and wife sharing a life. Rose thrived, oblivious to the complicated dance of adults around her. She'd gained weight noticeably, her face filling out into the round softness of healthy infancy. Her cries grew stronger, more insistent, the sound of a child who expected her needs to be met rather than one fading into resigned silence. Clara fed her every few hours, her body now producing milk in abundance, the physical connection between them deepening even as Clara tried to maintain emotional distance. Because Rose wasn't hers. Clara reminded herself of this constantly, even as the baby's weight in her arms felt increasingly right, even as Rose's dark blue eyes seemed to recognize her and light with something approaching joy. This was temporary. This was service. This was necessary work that would eventually end, leaving Clara once again without purpose. The thought should have been freeing. Instead, it terrified her. On the 8th day of their marriage, Clara was kneading bread dough when she heard unfamiliar voices outside. She moved to the window and felt her stomach drop. 3 wagons stood in the yard, and climbing down from them were faces she recognized from Millridge, Mrs. Hutchinson, Thomas Green, the fabric merchant and his wife, and leading them all like a general marshalling troops, Mrs. Pemberton. Evan emerged from the barn, his posture immediately defensive. Clara wiped flour from her hands and stepped onto the porch, her heart hammering but her spine straight. She was married now, legal, respectable. They had no ammunition left. But Mrs. Pemberton's smile suggested otherwise. "Mrs. Cole," the older woman said, her voice dripping false sweetness. "How lovely to see you in your new role. Though I confess the speed of your elevation from unwanted widow to rancher's wife raises certain questions. The only question that matters is whether our marriage is legal," Evan said, moving to stand beside Clara. "Which it is. Judge Morrison filed the paperwork. We have witnesses. Everything is in order." "Oh, I'm sure the paperwork is immaculate," Mrs. Pemberton agreed. "But paperwork doesn't address the fundamental issue, does it? The question of fitness. The question of whether an infant should be raised by a woman who couldn't even keep her own child alive." The words hit Clara like a physical blow. She felt Evan tense beside her, heard his sharp intake of breath. But Mrs. Pemberton wasn't finished. "We've consulted with legal authorities about the situation. It seems that while your marriage may be legitimate, that doesn't automatically grant Mrs. Cole maternal rights to a child who isn't hers by blood, particularly when there are questions about her capability, her history, her fundamental suitability for motherhood." "Rose is my daughter," Evan said, his voice low and dangerous. "I decide who cares for her. I decide who's suitable. Not you, not the church, not anyone else." "Actually, Mr. Cole, the law has something to say about that." Mrs. Pemberton produced a folded document from her bag. "This is a petition for review of child welfare, signed by concerned citizens of Millridge and supported by testimony from multiple witnesses. It requests a formal hearing to determine whether your daughter's current living situation serves her best interests. Clara's vision swam. A hearing meant judges, meant lawyers, meant standing in front of authority and having every failure, every loss, every inadequacy laid bare for examination. It meant losing. Because the world didn't side with women like her. The world never had. "You can't do this," Evan said, but Clara heard the desperation creeping into his voice. "You can't just take a man's child because you don't approve of his choices." "We're not taking anyone," Mrs. Hutchinson interjected, her voice carrying the practiced sympathy of someone who'd perfected cruelty disguised as concern. "We're simply asking that proper authorities examine the situation and determine what's best for an innocent baby. Surely you can't object to that, unless you have something to hide." The implication hung in the air, ugly and unmistakable. Clara felt rage building beneath her fear, hot and unfamiliar. For 2 years in Millridge, she'd accepted their judgment, absorbed their disdain, allowed them to define her worth. She'd believed them when they said her body was wrong, her capacity inadequate, her very existence a kind of failure. But standing on this porch, in a home she'd helped restore, beside a man who'd trusted her with his daughter's life, Clara felt something crack open inside her. Not acceptance, not resignation, pure, burning fury. "Get off our land," she said, her voice quiet but carrying across the yard with unexpected force. Mrs. Pemberton's eyebrows rose. "Excuse me? You heard me? Get off our land. You're not welcome here." Clara descended the porch steps, closing the distance between herself and the assembled crowd. "You want to know about fitness? About capability? Let me tell you what I'm capable of. I've kept a dying infant alive when every single one of you turned your backs. I've fed her from my own body, cared for her day and night, watched her transform from a failing scrap of life into a thriving child. That's what I'm capable of. What are you capable of, Mrs. Pemberton? Besides persecuting people whose only crime is surviving loss? How dare you speak to me? How dare you?" Clara's voice rose, surprising herself with its strength. "How dare you wrap your cruelty in concern? How dare you use a baby's welfare as an excuse to satisfy your need to judge and control? Rose is loved here. She's cared for. She's wanted, which is more than you offered when Evan came to town begging for help and you all laughed." Mrs. Hutchinson stepped forward, her face flushed. "We're trying to protect that child from a woman who's proven she can't be trusted with an infant's life. Your son died, Clara, died while in your care. How can we trust you won't fail again?" The accusation landed like it was meant to, driving air from Clara's lungs. She felt Evan move beside her, heard him start to speak, but she raised a hand to stop him. This fight was hers. These wounds were hers. And she was done letting other people weaponize her grief. "My son died because he came too early," Clara said, her voice shaking but steady. "Because his lungs weren't developed. Because sometimes babies die despite everything we do to save them. The midwife said so. The doctor confirmed it. But none of you cared about facts. You needed someone to blame, and I was convenient. A woman whose body didn't conform to your standards, whose husband left her, whose existence made you uncomfortable. So you decided I was responsible. You decided I was inadequate. You decided I deserved to be punished for the crime of surviving what should have destroyed me." She took another step forward, and Mrs. Pemberton actually stepped back. "But I'm done accepting your judgment. I'm done believing the lies you tell about me. Rose is alive because of me, thriving because of me. And if you think some piece of paper in a court hearing will change that, you're welcome to try. But know this, I will fight you. I will stand in front of any judge you bring and tell the truth about what happened in Millridge, about how you let a baby suffer rather than accept help from someone you'd decided wasn't worthy, about how your respectability mattered more to you than a child's life. So go ahead, file your petition, demand your hearing, see what happens when your cruelty gets examined in the light." Silence fell over the yard, broken only by the wind moving through the pines and Rose's distant cry from inside the cabin. Clara's hands trembled at her sides, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs, but she held Mrs. Pemberton's gaze without flinching. Finally, Thomas Green cleared his throat. "Maybe we should reconsider this approach. The baby does look healthy, and legally, they're married, and the petition stands, Mrs. Pemberton cut him off, but her voice had lost some of its certainty. The hearing will proceed. We'll let proper authorities make the determination. You do that, Evan said, his voice cold. And when those authorities ask why concerned citizens from Millridge waited 3 weeks to raise questions about my daughter's welfare, make sure you explain that you only became concerned after I married the woman who saved Rose's life. I'm sure that won't sound suspicious at all. Mrs. Pemberton's mouth thinned to a razor line. She gathered her skirts and climbed back into her wagon with rigid dignity. The others followed, their expressions ranging from shame to stubborn righteousness. As the wagons pulled away, Clara heard Mrs. Hutchinson's voice carrying back across the meadow. She's always been unnatural, angry underneath all that fake meekness. This just proves what we suspected all along. The wagons disappeared into the trees, and Clara's knees nearly gave out. Evan caught her elbow, steadying her. Are you all right? No, Clara said honestly. I'm terrified, but I meant every word. I know you did. Evan's grip on her elbow tightened briefly before releasing. I've never seen you like that, like a she-wolf defending her den. She's not my den to defend, Clara said, but the words felt hollow even as she spoke them. Rose isn't mine. I'm not actually her mother. Aren't you? Evan's question was quiet, but it echoed in Clara's chest like thunder. Rose's cries intensified from inside, demanding attention that transcended complicated questions of legal and biological motherhood. Clara went to her automatically, lifting her from the bassinet, feeling the baby's immediate settling at her familiar scent and touch. She fed Rose while Evan paced the main room, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. They'll push for the hearing, he said finally. Mrs. Pemberton doesn't make threats she doesn't intend to follow through on, which means we need to prepare. We need evidence that Rose is thriving, testimony that our household is stable, something that counteracts their narrative. The Hendersons, Clara suggested, shifting Rose to her other breast. They witnessed the marriage. They can testify about our legitimacy. That's a start. But we need more. We need someone from Millridge to break ranks, someone willing to tell the truth about what happened when I came looking for help. Evan stopped pacing, turning to face her. Who in that town might have a conscience? Who might be willing to stand against Mrs. Pemberton? Clara thought about the market square, about 2 years of careful observation, about who had looked away with shame versus who had looked away with satisfaction. Martha Sullivan, she said slowly, the woman with the nursing baby. When you approached her that day, she looked conflicted. Her husband stopped you, but she wanted to help. I saw it in her face. Would she testify? I don't know. Her husband has influence in town. Going against Mrs. Pemberton would cost her socially. Clara stroked Rose's downy hair, feeling the baby's suckling slow as she drifted toward sleep. But she has a baby the same age as Rose. Maybe that connection would matter more than social standing. It's worth trying. Evan resumed pacing, his mind clearly working through possibilities. I'll ride to Millridge tomorrow, speak with her directly. If her husband's there, I'll wait until he leaves. If she refuses, at least we tried. And if the hearing goes badly, if the judge sides with them? Evan stopped pacing, his face hardening into an expression Clara had never seen before. Then we leave. Pack everything we can carry, take Rose, and head to California or Oregon, or anywhere they can't find us. I won't let them take her, Clara. I won't let them destroy what we've built here. The certainty in his voice, the absolute conviction that he'd burned down his entire life before surrendering Rose, made something shift in Clara's understanding of the man she'd married. This wasn't just about a father's love for his daughter. This was about refusing to let the world's judgment determine worth, refusing to accept that power and respectability granted authority over human lives. This was about the same fight Clara had been waging in her own way, the same resistance to the lie that some people deserved dignity while others deserved only shame. We won't run, Clara said quietly. We'll fight. We'll stand in that courtroom or hearing room or wherever they drag us, and we'll tell the truth. All of it. The good, the bad, the complicated parts that don't fit into their neat narrative about propriety and fitness. That's a risk. Judges can be unpredictable. Telling the whole truth might give them ammunition we haven't considered. Maybe. But I'm tired of hiding. Tired of apologizing for existing. Tired of letting other people write my story. Clara looked down at Rose, now sleeping peacefully against her chest, milk-drunk and safe. This baby is alive because I refused to stay in my assigned corner, because I stepped forward when everyone said I had no right. That's worth fighting for. Worth defending. Evan crossed the room, settling into the chair across from her. In the afternoon light filtering through clean windows, Claire could see the exhaustion still etched into his face, but also something else. Respect, maybe, or recognition of a kindred spirit. Sarah would have liked you, he said unexpectedly. She had no patience for people who let the world define their limits. She'd have respected your refusal to back down. Tell me more about her, Clara said, surprising herself with the request. Not just the basics. Tell me who she really was. Evan was quiet for a moment, his eyes distant. She was fierce, quick-tempered when she saw injustice, slower to anger about personal slights. She taught herself to shoot because she said women on the frontier couldn't afford to be helpless, then outshot me consistently and wasn't shy about mentioning it. She read everything she could get her hands on, newspapers, books, seed catalogs, anything with words. She wanted to start a school out here eventually, teach children whose families couldn't afford to send them to town. His voice softened. She also snored, loudly, denied it completely, got genuinely offended when I mentioned it. She burned the first 3 attempts at making bread and threw the 4th loaf out the window in frustration. She was terrified of spiders, but would catch them in a jar and release them outside because she said killing something just for being different was wrong. His voice caught. She would have fought like hell to survive childbirth. Would have wanted Rose to live even if it cost her everything. That's who she was. Clara felt tears prickling her eyes, not from sadness, but from the beauty of being trusted with this portrait of a woman she'd never meet, but whose legacy shaped every day of her current life. She sounds extraordinary. She was. And I can't. Evan struggled with words. I married you for Rose's sake. For practical reasons. I want you to know that I'm not trying to replace Sarah. That I'm not expecting... I know, Clara said gently. I didn't expect romance, Evan. I expected partnership, respect, shared purpose. You've given me all of that. It's more than I had any right to hope for. You had every right to hope for more, Evan said, his voice rough. You deserve to be someone's first choice, not their strategic necessity. Maybe, but life doesn't traffic in deserving. It traffics in what is. And what is? Clara looked around the cabin, at the clean windows and organized shelves, at Rose sleeping peacefully, at the man sitting across from her who'd chosen to fight alongside her rather than abandon her to judgment. What is turns out to be more than I imagined possible. The moment stretched between them, intimate without being romantic, honest without being painful. Then Rose stirred, making small sounds in her sleep, and the moment passed into the rhythm of daily care. Evan left for Millridge before dawn the next morning, riding out into gray light with a promise to return before dark. Clara spent the day in anxious activity, baking bread she didn't need, scrubbing floors that were already clean, finding busy work to occupy hands that wanted to shake. She fed Rose, talked to her, sang half-remembered songs, and tried not to imagine worst-case scenarios. When hoofbeats finally sounded in the late afternoon, Clara rushed to the window. Evan was riding up the path, and behind him, carefully picking her way on a gentle mare, was a woman Clara recognized immediately. Martha Sullivan sat side-saddle in a traveling dress, her face pale but determined, a carpetbag strapped to her saddle. Clara met them at the porch, questions dying on her lips when she saw Martha's expression. I can only stay tonight, Martha said before Clara could speak. My husband thinks I'm visiting my sister in Pine Ridge. He'll be furious when he finds out the truth, but... She stopped, swallowed hard. I watched you step forward that day in the market square. Watched you offer help when everyone else, including me, turned away. That's haunted me every night since. So when Mr. Cole came asking for someone to testify, I knew I had to come. Had to try to make it right. You don't have to do this, Clara said, though hope was already blooming in her chest. It will cost you. Your husband's position, your social standing, everything you've built in Millridge. I know. Martha climbed down from the horse with Evan's help. But I have a daughter at home, 6 months old, healthy and thriving because I can feed her. When I think about Rose dying because no one would help, about what might have happened if you hadn't been brave, her voice broke. I have to live with myself, Mrs. Cole. And I can't live with myself if I stay silent and let them destroy you for doing what I should have done. Clara felt tears spilling down her cheeks. She reached out, clasped Martha's hands in hers. Thank you. You can't know what this means. I think I can, Martha said quietly. Evan told me about the hearing, about what Mrs. Pemberton is trying to do. I'll testify. I'll tell them exactly what I saw, what I heard, how everyone refused to help. It won't be comfortable, but it's the truth. That night, the three of them sat around the table while Rose slept, planning their defense like generals preparing for battle. Martha provided names of others in Millridge who'd been uncomfortable with how Evan had been treated, people who might be willing to speak if given courage by example. Evan shared what he knew about the judge who'd been assigned to the hearing, an older man named Carlyle, who was known for fairness, but also for strict adherence to social conventions. He's not going to like that you married so quickly, Martha warned. He'll see it as suspicious, potentially evidence that the marriage is a sham designed to circumvent proper oversight. Then we'll have to convince him otherwise, Clara said. Show him that our partnership is real, functional, beneficial to Rose. How do you prove that in a courtroom? Martha asked. Clara looked at Rose's bassinet, at the baby who'd transformed from dying to thriving in less than 3 weeks. We bring Rose. Let the judge see her. See how healthy she is, how well cared for. Show him the physical evidence of success. That's risky, Evan warned. If she's fussy, if she cries, it could be used against us. Or it could show that she's a normal, healthy baby with normal baby needs, Clara countered. The alternative is leaving her here, making her theoretical, easier to turn into a symbol rather than a real child with real needs. They debated long into the night, weighing risks and strategies, until Martha finally retired to the smaller bedroom Evan had vacated for her use. Evan banked the fire while Clara fed Rose one last time before sleep. Are you frightened? Evan asked quietly, watching her with the baby. Terrified, Clara admitted. But also something else. Determined, maybe. Ready to fight. Good. Evan settled into the rocking chair Sarah had used, his big frame looking almost comical in the delicate furniture. Because I have the feeling this fight is going to require everything we have. Then we'll give everything we have? Clara burped Rose gently, feeling the baby's small body warm and solid against her shoulder. For her, for us, for the chance to prove that worth isn't determined by other people's judgment. The hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday in Pine Ridge, where Judge Carlyle happened to be settling land disputes. Word spread quickly through the territorial network of gossip and concern, and by the morning of the hearing, a small crowd had gathered outside the trading post where proceedings would take place. Clara dressed carefully in her best wool dress, pinned her hair with extra care, and tried to calm her racing heart. Martha had returned to Millridge to collect her testimony notes, and had ridden back that morning with news that Mrs. Pemberton had recruited additional witnesses, people willing to speak about Clara's failures and inadequacies. She has the baker's wife testifying about how you kept to yourself, never joined community gatherings, Martha reported, her face grim. And Thomas Green is going to talk about your husband's death, imply there were suspicious circumstances. There were no suspicious circumstances, Clara said, hearing her voice shake. Robert fell. It was an accident. The sheriff confirmed it. They'll twist anything they can, Evan said, strapping on the good belt he saved for town. Make innocent things sound sinister. We just have to stay calm, tell the truth, trust that the judge can see through their manipulation. They rode to Pine Ridge together, Rose wrapped warmly against the autumn chill. The baby was alert and content, her dark blue eyes taking in the passing landscape with infant curiosity. Clara held her carefully, trying to memorize this moment before everything changed. The trading post's back room had been cleared for the hearing, chairs arranged in rough rows, a table set up front for Judge Carlyle. He was a lean man in his 60s, his face weathered by years of frontier service, his eyes sharp and assessing. He nodded curtly as they entered, his expression revealing nothing. Mrs. Pemberton sat in the front row, flanked by her sons and a collection of Millridge's most influential citizens. Mrs. Hutchinson, Thomas Green, the minister, the doctor who'd examined Rose after Sarah's death, all of them watching Clara with expressions ranging from pity to contempt. Judge Carlisle banged a gavel to call order, and the hearing began with his dry recitation of the petition's claims. That Clara Whitmore Cole was unfit to care for an infant based on her history of child loss and questionable moral character. That Evan Cole had married her under suspicious circumstances, potentially to avoid proper oversight of his daughter's welfare. That Rose Cole deserved placement with a stable, established family, rather than remaining in a household of dubious propriety. Mrs. Pemberton testified first, her voice carrying righteous conviction as she described the improper living arrangement, the rushed marriage, Clara's history of loss, and Robert's suspicious death. She painted a picture of desperate people making desperate choices, of a baby used as pawn in an inappropriate relationship. Thomas Green testified next, elaborating on Robert Whitmore's death, with implications that Clara's testimony about an accidental fall couldn't be trusted. The baker's wife spoke about Clara's isolation in Millridge, her refusal to participate in community life, suggesting it indicated mental instability or moral deficiency. Clara sat through it all with her hands clenched in her lap, Rose sleeping peacefully against her chest. Evan's jaw grew tighter with each testimony, his hands gripping his knees so hard his knuckles went white. Then it was their turn to present their defense. Martha Sullivan stood first, her voice shaking but clear as she described the day in the market square, how Evan had begged for help, how everyone had refused, how Clara had been the only person willing to step forward. "She saved that baby's life," Martha said, looking directly at Judge Carlisle. "Rose was dying. Everyone could see it, but no one would help because helping meant associating with Mr. Cole, meant dealing with Mrs. Whitmore as she was then. We were all more concerned with propriety than with an infant's survival. Mrs. Cole was the only one brave enough to actually do something." "And yet," Mrs. Pemberton interjected, "Mrs. Sullivan's own testimony confirms that Mrs. Cole was considered unsuitable by the entire community. Surely that collective judgment carries weight." "Collective judgment said the earth was flat," Judge Carlisle said dryly. "Continue, Mrs. Sullivan." Martha described Rose's transformation, the weight gain, the improved color and breathing. She testified that the marriage, while quick, seemed to be based on genuine partnership and shared purpose rather than impropriety. Under cross-examination from Mrs. Pemberton, she admitted she'd only observed the household once, but her conviction remained unshaken. Evan testified next, his voice steady as he described Sarah's death, his desperate search for help, his certainty that Rose would have died without Clara's intervention. He answered questions about the marriage directly, admitting it had been strategic but insisting it was also built on mutual respect and shared commitment to Rose's welfare. Then Judge Carlisle called Clara to testify. She stood on shaking legs, handed Rose to Evan, and approached the front of the room, every eye in the trading post fixed on her, measuring her worth, weighing her adequacy. Judge Carlisle studied her for a long moment before speaking. "Mrs. Cole, I've heard considerable testimony about your unsuitability for motherhood, about your history of loss, your isolation, your questionable character. I'd like to hear your response in your own words." Clara took a breath, steadying herself. Then she told the truth. She described her marriage to Robert, her difficult pregnancy, the baby who came too early despite everything the midwife tried. She spoke about holding her son as he died, about the grief that followed, about Robert's inability to forgive what neither of them could have prevented. She admitted his death had likely been suicide rather than accident, spoke about the shame that came with that knowledge, about being blamed for things beyond her control. "The town needed someone to punish," Clara said, her voice gaining strength. "I was convenient, different enough to make uncomfortable, damaged enough to seem deserving. So they decided I was cursed, inadequate, unworthy. And I believed them. For 2 years I believed exactly what they told me about myself." She looked directly at Mrs. Pemberton. "But then Rose needed help, and suddenly my adequacy didn't matter. Suddenly my body wasn't wrong, it was necessary. Suddenly I had value, but only as a tool to save a baby no one else would touch. And when I succeeded, when Rose lived and thrived because of me, that threatened the narrative. So new accusations had to be invented. New reasons I wasn't good enough had to be found." Clara turned back to Judge Carlyle. You want to know if I'm fit to be Rose's mother? Look at her. She's healthy, thriving, loved. She's fed every few hours from my own body, held and cared for and cherished. I may not have given birth to her, but I've given her life in every way that matters. That's my fitness. Not what people say about me, but what I've actually done. The room had gone completely silent. Judge Carlyle's expression remained unreadable, but he was listening intently. Mrs. Pemberton claims this marriage is a sham, Clara continued. Maybe it didn't start as romance. Maybe it was strategy, necessity, mutual benefit. But it's become real partnership built on shared purpose and genuine respect. Evan and I are raising Rose together, building a household together, creating something functional and good. That's worth protecting, worth fighting for. She returned to her seat, her legs nearly giving out as adrenaline drained from her system. Evan reached over, squeezed her hand briefly before releasing it. Judge Carlyle called for final statements. Mrs. Pemberton stood, her voice ringing with conviction about protecting innocent children from unsuitable circumstances. Then the judge turned to Evan. Mr. Cole, do you have anything to add? Evan stood, Rose still in his arms. He didn't speak immediately, just looked down at his daughter, his expression carrying the weight of everything he'd survived and everything he still had to lose. Your Honor, 3 weeks ago my daughter was dying. I'd tried everything, gone everywhere, begged everyone I could find for help. The whole world told me she wasn't worth saving, that I should accept her death and move on. But I couldn't. She's my daughter. She's all I have left of my wife, and she deserves a chance at life. He lifted Rose slightly. Clara gave her that chance, gave us both that chance. She didn't have to. She could have stayed safe in her corner, avoided the judgment that helping me would bring, but she stepped forward anyway. That's the kind of person I want raising my daughter. That's the kind of person I'm honored to call my wife. Rose chose that moment to wake, her cry immediate and insistent. Evan tried to soothe her, but she was clearly hungry, clearly needing what only Clara could provide. Without hesitation, Clara stood and reached for the baby. Rose settled immediately in her arms, her crying easing as Clara prepared to feed her right there in the trading post, in front of the judge and Mrs. Pemberton and everyone who'd come to witness her judgment. Judge Carlyle watched this exchange with sharp attention. Mrs. Cole, are you comfortable nursing in open court? I'm comfortable doing what my daughter needs, Your Honor, Clara said firmly, regardless of who's watching. The judge's lips twitched, almost a smile. He looked at Rose, now latching and feeding contentedly, her small hand kneading against Clara's breast. The petition is denied, he said flatly. Mrs. Pemberton shot to her feet. Your Honor, you can't simply— I can, and I have. Judge Carlyle's voice carried absolute authority. I see a healthy infant, well cared for by parents who clearly love her. I see a marriage that may have started as strategy, but appears to have developed into genuine partnership. I see no evidence of neglect, abuse, or moral corruption beyond what Mrs. Pemberton's imagination has manufactured. He stood, gathering his papers. Mrs. Cole's history of loss is tragic, but it's not evidence of inadequacy. Her isolation in Millridge speaks more to that community's cruelty than to her character. And her willingness to risk everything to save a stranger's child demonstrates exactly the kind of moral fiber we should hope to see in parents. He turned to Mrs. Pemberton. Your petition appears motivated more by desire to punish than to protect. I will not allow this court to become an instrument of your vengeance. The matter is closed. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that echoed in the suddenly silent room. Mrs. Pemberton's face flushed dark red. She opened her mouth to protest further, but Judge Carlyle had already gathered his things and was leaving through the back door. The Millridge contingent sat in stunned silence for a moment before beginning to file out, their expressions ranging from shame to resentment. Clara sat holding Rose, hardly daring to believe what had just happened. They'd won. Actually won. Evan's hand found her shoulder, gripping tight. Martha Sullivan was crying openly, her face split in a broad smile. The Hendersons, who'd sat quietly in the back throughout, came forward to offer congratulations and support. But Clara's attention was on Rose, feeding peacefully in her arms, oblivious to the battle that had just been fought for her sake. This baby who wasn't hers by blood, but had become hers in every other way. This child she'd fought for, testified for, risked everything to protect. Her daughter, she thought, in all the ways that mattered. Her daughter. The ride back to the ranch felt surreal, as if they'd crossed from one world into another. Clara held Rose wrapped against the autumn chill, while Evan guided the wagon through lengthening shadows. Behind them, Martha Sullivan had ridden toward Pine Ridge to stay with friends before facing her husband's inevitable anger, her parting words still echoing in Clara's mind. Some things are worth losing everything for. Neither Clara nor Evan spoke much during the journey. The weight of what had happened, what they'd survived, seemed too enormous for words. Rose slept peacefully, her breathing deep and even, unaware that her entire future had hung in balance just hours before. When the cabin came into view, golden light from the setting sun painting its log walls amber, Clara felt something release in her chest. Home, she thought. Not just shelter, not just strategic necessity, but actual home. Evan helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than strictly necessary. Their eyes met, and Clara saw her own exhausted relief mirrored in his face. "We did it," he said quietly. "We did," Clara agreed, then corrected herself. "You did. Your testimony about wanting me to raise Rose, about being honored to call me your wife. That's what convinced Judge Carlisle. That's what made it real." "I meant every word." Evan's voice carried an intensity that made Clara's breath catch. "I know this started as strategy, but Clara, what you did today, standing in front of all those people and telling the truth about your pain, defending not just yourself but us, what we're building here." He stopped, seemed to struggle for words. Sarah would have called that courage. I call it remarkable. Clara felt heat rising in her cheeks. "I was terrified the entire time." Being terrified and doing it anyway is the definition of courage. Evan collected Rose's bassinet from the wagon bed. "Come on, let's get you both inside before the temperature drops." The cabin felt different that evening, warmer somehow, despite the same fire in the same hearth. Clara fed Rose while Evan prepared a simple meal, and they ate in comfortable silence, too drained for conversation, but content in shared space. When Rose drifted into sleep, Clara settled her in the bassinet and found herself standing at the window, looking out at stars emerging in the darkening sky. "What are you thinking about?" Evan asked from behind her. "Everything. Nothing. How strange it is that 3 weeks ago I was selling bread at a market table, invisible to everyone around me. And now I'm here, legally someone's wife, functionally someone's mother, with a future that extends beyond the next day's survival." Evan moved to stand beside her at the window. "Does it feel like the right future?" Clara considered this carefully, examining her feelings with the honesty the question deserved. "It feels like a future I didn't know I was allowed to want, which isn't quite the same as right, but it's something. It's more than I had." "You deserve more than just more than you had," Evan said quietly. "You deserve someone who chose you first, who wanted you for who you are rather than what you could provide." "Maybe," Clara turned to face him, studying his weathered face in the firelight. "But wanting and deserving don't always align with what's possible. And what's possible here, partnership, shared purpose, building something functional together, that's not nothing, Evan. That's actually quite a lot." "It is," he agreed. "But I want you to know that if someday you meet someone who can offer you more, who can give you the kind of marriage people write poems about, I won't stand in your way. This was supposed to protect you, not trap you." Clara felt something crack open in her chest, some careful guard she'd been maintaining without fully realizing it. "Evan, look at me. Really look at me. I'm not the kind of woman men write poems about. I'm not delicate or beautiful or any of the things the world values in women. I'm too big, too damaged, too marked by loss. The fact that you see me as a partner, that you respect what I bring to this household, that you defended me in that courtroom, that's more than most women like me ever get, more than I ever expected." "Stop." Evan's voice carried unexpected sharpness. "Stop diminishing yourself. Stop accepting the world's judgment about your worth. You're capable, strong, kind, brave. Those are the things that actually matter. And any man who can't see that is an idiot not worth your time. You're only saying that because I helped Rose. I'm saying it because it's true." Evan reached out, his calloused hand cupping her cheek with surprising gentleness. "Clara, I married you for Rose's sake. That's honest. But staying married to you, building this life with you, that's becoming something I want for my own sake, for our sake, not just Rose's." Clara's breath caught. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I don't know exactly what this is between us, but I know it's real. I know I look forward to coming inside at the end of the day and finding you here. I know the cabin feels empty when you're not in it. I know watching you with Rose, seeing how you love her, how you fight for her, makes me—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "Makes me think maybe Sarah was right. That love doesn't stop when someone dies. It just changes shape, makes room for new kinds of love alongside the old." Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks before she could stop them. "I'm not trying to replace her. I could never—" "I know, and I'm not asking you to. Sarah will always be a part of me, part of this ranch, part of Rose's story. But that doesn't mean there's no room for you to be part of it too. Doesn't mean what we're building together is less valuable because it started from necessity rather than romance." He brushed tears from her cheeks with his thumb, his touch achingly gentle. "I'm not good with words like this. Sarah was the eloquent one. But I need you to know that you're not just convenient, not just functional. You're important to me, to Rose, to this family we're building." Clara leaned into his touch, letting herself feel the warmth of his hand against her skin, the solid presence of him beside her. "I don't know how to do this. How to believe I'm allowed to want more than just survival. How to trust that this won't be taken away the moment I let myself fully claim it." "We figure it out together," Evan said simply. "One day at a time. No grand promises, no pressure to feel things we don't feel. Just partnership, honesty, taking care of each other while we take care of Rose. Can that be enough for now?" Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. Evan pulled her into an embrace, careful and respectful, but undeniably real. Clara allowed herself to lean against his chest, to feel his heartbeat steady beneath her cheek, to accept comfort she'd been denying herself for years. They stood like that for a long moment, two damaged people learning to hold each other's broken pieces with care. Then Rose stirred, making small sounds that would soon become full cries, and they separated naturally, returning to the rhythms of caregiving that had become their shared language. The weeks that followed the hearing brought changes both subtle and profound. Word spread through the territorial network that Judge Carlisle had denied Mrs. Pemberton's petition, and the story took on different shapes depending on who was telling it. Some painted Clara as a manipulative woman who'd trapped a grieving widower. Others saw her as a hero who'd saved an innocent child. Most simply noted the facts and moved on, filing the Cole household under complicated but functional in the ledger of frontier life. Mrs. Pemberton made one final attempt at interference, sending a letter to territorial authorities questioning Judge Carlisle's judgment. The response was swift and unequivocal. Unless new evidence of actual harm or neglect emerged, the case was closed and further harassment would result in legal consequences for the complainant. The letter sat on Clara's kitchen table for a week, tangible proof that the threat had finally ended, before Evan used it to start a fire one cold morning. Martha Sullivan paid a price for her testimony. Her husband, furious at her defiance and the social consequences it brought, grew distant and cold. But Martha visited the ranch monthly, bringing her daughter to play with Rose as they grew, building a friendship with Clara rooted in mutual respect and shared understanding of courage's cost. Eventually, her husband's anger faded into grudging acceptance, and Martha's willingness to stand against community judgment slowly shifted how some in Millridge viewed both her and the Cole family. The Hendersons became regular trading partners and occasional dinner guests, their quiet support meaning more to Clara than grand gestures ever could. Through them, Clara learned that several Millridge families had privately expressed shame about how she'd been treated, though few had the courage to say so directly. She didn't need their apologies. Their silent acknowledgement was enough. Rose thrived beyond anyone's hopes. By 2 months, she'd doubled her birth weight, her face round and healthy, her cries lusty and demanding. Clara continued nursing her, her body producing abundant milk, but they began supplementing with mashed vegetables and thin porridges as Rose showed readiness for solid food. Each milestone felt like victory, each sign of thriving a testament to the choice Clara had made in that market square. But it was the small moments between the milestones that transformed their household from strategic arrangement into actual family. Evan teaching Clara to ride so she could accompany him checking fence lines, Rose strapped to her back in a sling Evan had fashioned from canvas and leather. Clara teaching Evan to make bread, their hands bumping in the flour, laughing at his first misshapen attempt. The three of them sitting on the porch at sunset, Rose playing with her toes while Clara and Evan discussed plans for spring planting. The larger bedroom slowly became Clara's in more than name. She added touches Sarah had never included. Herbs hung to dry from the ceiling beams, her mother's Bible on the bedside table, a rag rug she'd woven during Rose's naps. Evan helped her hang curtains she'd sewn, standing on a chair to reach the high rod, while Clara directed from below. When Sarah's trunk was moved to the barn loft for storage, the action felt natural rather than erasing, honoring rather than forgetting. They didn't discuss the shift in their relationship directly, but it happened in increments too small to name, but too significant to ignore. Evan's hand finding Clara's during evening prayers before meals, Clara asking Evan's opinion on household decisions when she didn't strictly need permission. The way they'd started saying we and our without conscious thought. 3 months after the hearing, on a December evening when snow fell soft outside the windows, Clara was rocking Rose to sleep when Evan returned from checking the animals. He stamped snow from his boots, hung his coat, then stopped in the doorway to Rose's room, watching Clara sing a lullaby in German that her own mother had sung. When the song ended and Rose had drifted fully into sleep, Clara looked up to find Evan watching with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What?" she asked softly, settling Rose in her cradle. A beautiful piece Evan had built from pine, sanded smooth and carved with roses along the headboard. "I was just thinking," Evan said quietly, "about how different this house sounds now. How it used to be so silent except for Rose crying. How now there's singing and laughter and the sound of someone moving through rooms with purpose rather than just survival." Clara stood, moving to where he waited in the doorway. "Does it bother you, the changes?" "No." Evan shook his head. "Feels right. Like the house is finally being used the way Sarah imagined when we built it. As a home for raising children, for building a life. She'd be glad it's not sitting empty and grieving." "Do you still talk to her?" Clara asked, emboldened by the intimacy of the moment. "In your head, I mean. Tell her things?" "Sometimes." Evan's honesty came without hesitation. "Mostly to tell her about Rose, about how she's growing, what new things she's learned. Sometimes to ask what she'd do in situations where I'm uncertain. Less than I used to, though. That feels... I don't know if it's good or bad, but it's true." "I think it's healing," Claire said gently. "Moving forward doesn't mean forgetting. It just means the past isn't the only thing that matters anymore." Evan studied her face in the lamplight, his expression thoughtful. "Claire, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Are you happy? Here, with us, with this life we've built? Not content, not just surviving, actually happy?" The question deserved careful consideration. Clara thought about the market square in Mill Ridge, about 2 years of careful invisibility, about believing her life would never be more than managed existence. Then she thought about Rose's weight in her arms, about the satisfaction of bread rising in her own kitchen, about Evan's quiet presence making the cabin feel safe rather than confining. "I'm happier than I ever thought I'd be again," she said honestly. "There are still hard moments, still times when I'm afraid this will be taken away or that I'll fail somehow. But yes, Evan, I'm happy." "Good." Evan reached out, taking her hand in his. "Because I want you to be happy. Want this to be home for you, not just obligation or duty." Clara squeezed his hand, feeling the calluses from ranch work, the strength that had carried Rose when she was dying and defended Clara when the world called her unworthy. "It is home. You've made it home." They stood like that for a moment, hands joined, something shifting between them that felt like crossing a threshold. Then Evan cleared his throat, releasing her hand with what seemed like reluctance. "I should let you get some rest. Rose will be up again in a few hours." "Evan," Clara said before he could retreat, Would you want to sit with me for a while, just talk? I'm not ready for sleep yet." His smile was slow but genuine. "I'd like that." They settled in the main room, Evan in the rocking chair and Clara on the small sofa she'd positioned near the fireplace. They talked about small things, the coming winter, plans for the ranch, whether they should get a milk cow or continue trading with the Hendersons for dairy. But underneath the practical conversation ran a current of something deeper, an acknowledgement that they were building more than just a functional household. As the fire burned low and the hour grew late, Evan stood to bank the coals. I keep thinking about what you said in the courtroom, about how Rose needed help and suddenly your adequacy didn't matter, only your usefulness. That's haunted me. Clara waited, sensing he had more to say. I hope... Evan turned to face her, his expression earnest in the dying firelight. I hope you know that to me you're not just useful. You're not just a solution to a problem. You're important for who you are, not just what you can do. I'm learning to believe that, Clara said softly. You and Rose are teaching me. Every day, in small ways, you're teaching me that I'm allowed to take up space, to matter, to be seen. You've always been worth seeing, Evan said firmly. The world was just too blind to notice. Clara felt tears prickling her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming gift of being truly seen, truly valued. Thank you for saying that, for meaning it. Evan crossed to where she sat, extending his hand. Come on, let me walk you to your room like a proper gentleman. Clara took his hand, letting him pull her to her feet. They walked the short distance to her bedroom door, a journey that took perhaps 5 steps but felt significant somehow. At the threshold, Evan paused. Clara, I know we agreed this marriage was about partnership, not romance. And I'm not trying to change the terms without asking, but I need you to know, if someday you wanted more, if you ever felt like this could be more than just practical arrangement, I'd welcome that. I'd want that. Clara's breath caught. Evan, you don't have to answer now, he said quickly. I just needed you to know that the door is open if you ever want to walk through it. No pressure, no expectations, just possibility. He raised her hand to his lips, pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, then released her and stepped back. Good night, Clara. Sleep well. Good night, she managed, her voice barely a whisper. She closed the door and leaned against it, her heart racing. Possibility, he'd said. The word echoed in her mind as she changed into her nightgown, as she climbed into bed, as she lay in the darkness listening to the cabin settle around her. For 2 years, she'd believed possibility was something other people had, something women like her weren't permitted to claim. But now, in this house, with this man and this baby who'd become her family, possibility felt like something she might actually be allowed to reach for. Winter deepened, bringing snow that buried the valley in pristine white and temperatures that kept them close to the hearth. Clara and Evan fell into rhythms that felt increasingly natural, their partnership deepening through shared labor and shared care of Rose. They took turns rising in the night when Rose needed feeding, Evan bringing her to Clara rather than making Clara get up, then settling in the rocking chair to watch while Clara nursed. Sometimes he fell asleep there, his big frame somehow fitting into the delicate chair, and Clara would cover him with a quilt rather than wake him. Other times, after Rose was settled, they'd talk in hushed voices about everything and nothing. Evan spoke more about Sarah, the stories coming easier now, shared with Clara rather than hoarded as private grief. Clara spoke about her parents, both long dead, about her childhood dreams of marriage and family, about learning to let those dreams evolve into new shapes. I used to think happiness had to look a certain way, Clara admitted one night, Rose sleeping between them in the big bed they'd started sharing platonically when the temperature dropped below freezing. That it required romance and passion and the kind of love people sing about. But now I think maybe happiness is simpler. Maybe it's knowing someone has your back, knowing you're building something good together, knowing you matter to the people who matter to you. Evan, lying on his side facing her across Rose's sleeping form, smiled. Sarah used to say something similar. That frontier life required letting go of fairy tale expectations and embracing the beauty in functional partnership. She said the best marriages were the ones where both people worked toward shared goals, where respect mattered more than romance. She sounds very wise. She was, but she also... Evan paused, his hand gently touching Rose's downy hair. She also said that respect could grow into love if you let it. That the deepest kind of love was built on foundation of friendship and partnership, not just attraction. Clara's heart beat faster. Do you think that's true? I'm starting to. Evan's eyes met hers in the lamplight. I'm starting to think maybe what we're building here could become that kind of love, if we both wanted it to. Not replacing what I had with Sarah, but creating something new alongside it. I'd like that, Clara whispered, the admission feeling like jumping off a cliff. I'd like to try. Evan reached across Rose, his hand finding Clara's. Then we'll try. No rush, no pressure. We'll just keep building what we're building and see where it takes us. They fell asleep like that, hands joined across the baby who'd brought them together, 3 people becoming a family through choice and courage, and the slow, steady work of learning to trust. Spring came late to the valley, but arrived eventually, melting snow revealing land ready for planting. Rose turned 6 months old, sitting up on her own, babbling in nonsense syllables that Clara and Evan treated like profound conversation. Her dark blue eyes had lightened to match Evan's gray-green, though her dark hair remained Sarah's legacy. She laughed easily, reached for both Clara and Evan with equal enthusiasm, and showed no signs of the fragile infant who'd nearly died in a market square months before. On a warm April morning, Clara was hanging laundry while Rose played on a blanket nearby when she heard wagon wheels approaching. Her first instinct was still fear. Mrs. Pemberton returning, authorities coming to question. But the fear faded when she recognized Martha Sullivan's cheerful wave. Martha climbed down from the wagon with her daughter balanced on her hip, both of them wearing matching smiles. I come bearing news and offerings, Martha announced, producing a basket filled with fresh bread and preserves. Also gossip, if you're interested. Always interested in gossip, Clara admitted, settling them at the outdoor table Evan had built for working in good weather. What's happening in Millridge? Mrs. Pemberton has directed her reforming energy toward the saloon, Martha said, with barely suppressed glee. Decided fallen women and demon alcohol are more pressing concerns than your household. The saloon owner told her where she could direct her concerns. Very publicly, and now she's persona non grata at half the establishments in town. Clara laughed, surprised by how little satisfaction she felt in Mrs. Pemberton's comeuppance. I hope she finds more productive outlets for her energy. You're generous. Martha set her daughter down to play with Rose. The 2 babies immediately engaged in the serious business of grabbing each other's toes. Most people would enjoy her fall from grace. Maybe 6 months ago I would have, Clara admitted. But now I'm just grateful to be building something good here. What happens in Millridge doesn't matter as much anymore. Speaking of building something good, Martha said with studied casualness, you and Evan seem quite close lately. The Hendersons mentioned you 2 were holding hands at the trading post last week. Clara felt heat rising in her cheeks. It's complicated. Complicated like you're falling in love with your husband? Martha's tone was teasing but kind. Clara, that's not complicated. That's wonderful. Is it? Clara watched Rose and Martha's daughter playing, her heart full in ways she still didn't quite know how to name. I keep waiting for something to go wrong, for this to be taken away, for the world to decide I'm not allowed to be this happy. The world doesn't get to decide, Martha said firmly. You've earned this happiness. You've fought for it, bled for it, stood in courtrooms and defended it. Stop waiting for permission to claim it fully. The words settled into Clara's chest, taking root. Martha was right. She'd spent too long waiting for the world's approval, for someone to tell her she was allowed to want more than survival. But happiness wasn't something granted by external authority. It was something chosen, claimed, built with daily decisions to reach for more than just existing. When Evan came in from the fields for lunch, Clara met him at the door with Rose in her arms and decision in her heart. I need to tell you something, she said, before courage could fail. Evan's expression shifted to concern. Is everything all right? Yes. Better than all right. Clara took a breath, steadying herself. I just need you to know that I'm not waiting anymore. For permission or the right moment or certainty about the future. I'm choosing this. Choosing us. Choosing to build a real marriage, not just a strategic one. If that's what you still want. Evan's face transformed, relief and joy flooding his features. He stepped forward, cupping Clara's face in his work-roughened hands. It's what I want. It's what I've been wanting for months but was afraid to push for. Then stop being afraid, Clara said, echoing his words from their wedding night. We've both been afraid long enough. Evan kissed her then, gentle and careful, asking permission even as he claimed it. Clara kissed him back, Rose giggling between them, the three of them wrapped in afternoon sunlight and the promise of becoming what they'd already been building. A family, real and chosen and worth fighting for. Martha and her daughter left shortly after with knowing smiles and promises to visit soon. Clara and Evan spent the afternoon working side by side, the comfortable silence between them now charged with new understanding. When evening came and Rose was settled for sleep, they stood together on the porch, watching stars emerge over the mountains. I never thought I'd be here, Clara said quietly. Never thought I'd have a second chance at family, at love, at building a life worth living. Me neither, Evan admitted, his arm around her waist, holding her close. I thought the best parts of my life were behind me. But this, you, Rose, what we're creating together, this is better than I imagined possible. Sarah would approve? Sarah would be thrilled, Evan said with certainty. She always said life was too short to waste on fear and regret, that the right way to honor loss was to embrace the gift of second chances. Clara leaned into his warmth, feeling safe in ways she'd forgotten were possible. Then let's embrace it, fully, completely, without holding back. Agreed, Evan said, pressing a kiss to her temple. Starting right now. The months that followed were marked not by grand gestures, but by small confirmations of shared life. Evan moved his belongings back into the larger bedroom, the two of them navigating the intimacy of truly shared space with care and growing comfort. Clara began introducing herself as Evan's wife, without the mental caveat that it was only technically true. They made plans together, for expanding the house when Rose grew older, for possibly more children if they were blessed, for a future that stretched beyond mere survival into actual thriving. Rose grew into a bright, active toddler, calling Clara Mama, with the absolute certainty of a child who knew where she belonged. The first time she said it, Clara cried, overwhelmed by the gift of being claimed so completely. Evan held them both, his own eyes wet, whispering thanks to Sarah for the daughter who lived and to Clara for the mother who'd saved her. The second winter brought new challenges. Illness that swept through the valley, a difficult calving season, weeks of brutal cold that tested everyone's endurance. But they faced it together, Clara and Evan taking turns sitting up with Rose through fevers, working side by side to save struggling calves, finding warmth and partnership when the world outside was frozen and harsh. When spring came again, bringing Rose's first birthday, they celebrated with the Hendersons and Martha's family, the small gathering feeling like abundance. Clara baked a special cake, watching Rose destroy it with enthusiastic joy, and felt gratitude so profound it bordered on pain. That night, after their guests had departed and Rose was asleep, Clara and Evan sat on the porch in the warm spring darkness. Do you remember a year ago? Clara asked, when Evan carried a dying baby into a market square and everyone turned away. I remember, Evan said quietly. I remember thinking she was going to die, that I'd failed her before her life even started. And then you stepped forward and everything changed. We changed everything, Clara corrected. Together. By refusing to accept what the world said was inevitable. Evan pulled her closer, his arms solid around her shoulders. Best decision I ever made. Asking you to help. Best decision you ever made, saying yes. I think the best decision we made was choosing each other, Clara said. Choosing to build something real from something that started as desperate necessity. Choosing love when it would have been easier to settle for less. To choosing each other, Evan agreed, raising an imaginary glass and toast. To choosing each other, Clara echoed and sealed the promise with a kiss that tasted like joy and hard-won peace. 2 years after that day in the market square, Clara stood in the same porch doorway, watching Rose chase chickens in the yard while Evan repaired a fence section. Her hand rested on her gently swelling belly, feeling the flutter of new life, a pregnancy that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure, but which she faced with Evan's unwavering support and her own hard-won confidence. The town of Millridge had faded into irrelevance, though Clara heard occasional news through Martha's visits. Mrs. Pemberton had moved to Denver to live with her daughter, Mrs. Hutchinson had been caught in a financial scandal involving her husband's bank. The market square where Clara had once sold bread from a corner table had burned down and been rebuilt without her ever returning to see it. She didn't need to return. That life, that version of herself who'd believed invisibility was all she deserved, no longer existed. In its place was a woman who'd fought for her family, who'd stood in courtrooms and defended her right to love and be loved, who'd learned that worth wasn't determined by other people's judgment, but by what you built with your own hands and heart. Rose shrieked with laughter as Evan scooped her up, spinning her in circles before settling her on his shoulders. He caught Clara watching and smiled, that slow, genuine smile that still made her heart skip. He carried Rose to the porch, both of them flushed and happy. "Mama," Rose demanded, reaching for Clara. "Mama, look, Papa flew me." "I saw, sweetheart," Clara said, pulling Rose into her arms, savoring the solid weight of her, the absolute trust in her embrace. "You were flying so high." "Like a bird," Rose announced with toddler certainty. Evan wrapped his arms around both of them, his hand finding Clara's belly, feeling for the baby who would join them in late autumn. "Our family keeps growing," he said with quiet wonder. "It does," Clara agreed, looking at the cabin that had become home, at the land they'd cultivated together, at the future they'd built from the ruins of past loss. "And it's more than I ever dreamed possible." Rose wriggled free, demanding to be set down so she could return to chicken chasing. Clara and Evan watched her go, their hands joined, their hearts full. "Do you ever think about that day," Evan asked, "when I burst into the market square with a dying baby?" "Sometimes," Clara admitted. "I think about how terrified I was, how certain I was that helping you would only bring more pain, more failure, more confirmation that I was broken, and how I did it anyway because some things matter more than fear." "Thank you," Evan said, his voice rough with emotion, "for being brave enough to step forward, for saving Rose, for saving me, for building this life with me." "Thank you for seeing me," Clara said simply, "for looking at a woman the world had decided was worthless and seeing someone worth fighting for, worth partnering with, worth loving." They stood together on the porch as afternoon lengthened toward evening, watching their daughter play in the golden light, feeling the promise of new life growing between them, holding the miracle of second chances and hard-won happiness. The world had tried to tell them both that they were finished, that loss had used them up and left nothing worth saving. The world had been wrong. Because here, in this valley, with these mountains standing witness, two people who'd been broken and discarded had found each other and built something whole, had taken a dying baby and given her not just life but family, had transformed strategic necessity into genuine love through the daily work of showing up, choosing each other, refusing to accept that damaged meant unworthy. As the sun set behind the western peaks, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Clara leaned into Evan's warmth and felt complete. Not because her life was perfect or her past erased, but because she'd learned the truth Mrs. Pemberton and all her kind would never understand. Worth wasn't something granted by others. Worth was something you claimed, something you built, something you proved through the simple act of refusing to disappear. And Clara Whitmore Cole, once invisible in a market square corner, had claimed her worth with both hands and would never let it go again.